At my own graduation party, surrounded by 300 of our city's elite, my father tapped his champagne glass. He looked right past me, raised his glass to my younger sister, and said the words that finally broke my silence. "I wish it was you holding that diploma today. You are the only child who has ever truly made me proud." My mother nodded in agreement, while the crowd fell into a hushed, awkward silence. No one noticed when I quietly placed my cap on the table and walked out the back door. But what happened next shocked everyone, and it started with a single phone call. "My name is Gwendolyn. I am 34 years old, and I spent my entire life trying to earn the love of a family that only saw me as a shadow." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to walk away from toxic parents who underestimated your worth. The grand ballroom at the Oakwood Country Club was supposed to be celebrating my graduation. I had just earned my Executive Master of Business Administration from an Ivy League university, balancing grueling night classes with a highly demanding career that my parents knew absolutely nothing about. I honestly thought this achievement would finally be enough. I thought this incredibly difficult piece of paper would finally make my father Donovan look at me with the exact same adoration he always reserved for my younger sister Felicity. I was completely wrong. The sharp clinking of crystal echoed through the lavish hall. 300 invited guests, a strategic mix of mid-tier commercial real estate developers, local politicians, and high society socialites, turned their attention to the main stage. I stood near the front row, my heart hammering against my ribs, waiting for the public recognition I had bled for over the last 3 years. Donovan took the microphone. He adjusted his expensive silk tie, cleared his throat, and smiled his practiced charismatic smile that he used for investors. "Thank you all for gathering here tonight," he boomed, his deep voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings and crystal chandeliers. "We are here to celebrate true success, unmatched ambition, and the future legacy of this family." I took a hopeful step forward, a genuine smile forming on my face. This was it, the moment of validation I had craved since childhood. But his cold eyes slid right past me. He extended his free arm toward the VIP table where my 29-year-old sister Felicity sat, practically glowing in a custom designer gown. Beside her sat her husband Desmond. Desmond is a handsome black man of African descent, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, who always bragged loudly about his highly successful Web3 venture capital firm. "Felicity," my father continued, his voice thick with a fake emotion that made my stomach turn. "When I look at you, I see the absolute best of this family. I wish it was you holding that diploma today. You are the only child who has ever truly made me proud." The massive ballroom went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop on the hardwood floor. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting nervously between me and the stage. I felt the blood drain entirely from my face, a cold numbness spreading rapidly from my chest down to my fingertips. He had intentionally hijacked my graduation party to declare his blatant favoritism in front of half the city. Before I could even process the depth of the humiliation, fingers dug sharply into my bicep. My mother Caroline materialized beside me out of nowhere. Her manicured nails pinched my skin painfully as she leaned in close, her expensive floral perfume suffocating me. "Stop sulking right now," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that only I could hear over the awkward murmur of the crowd. "You have always been terribly jealous of your sister, just like when she won that beauty pageant, and you locked yourself in your room crying for 2 entire days." "I was 17 years old," I whispered back, my voice barely audible but shaking with suppressed anger. "I locked myself in my room because you completely refused to pay for my college applications, just so you could buy her a ridiculously expensive pageant dress." Caroline rolled her eyes dramatically, her grip tightening on my arm. "Stop living in the past and smile for the cameras. Look at Desmond. He just secured a $5 million real estate deal for your father today. That is what real success looks like, Gwendolyn. Not some overpriced piece of paper from a university. You should be taking notes from him instead of embarrassing us with this pathetic pity party." She shoved me slightly forward, expecting me to applaud. She fully expected me to swallow the insult, to shrink myself down to make room for Felicity's massive ego, exactly like I had done my entire life. But looking at Felicity, who was currently posing for photos with her champagne glass, and then at Desmond, who gave me a condescending, arrogant smirk, something inside me finally snapped. I did not cry. I did not yell. I did not cause the dramatic scene my mother was so desperately waiting to punish me for. I simply reached up, took off my graduation cap, and placed it gently on the pristine white tablecloth next to me. I grabbed my clutch and turned my back on the stage, the whispering guests, and the toxic family that had just publicly discarded me. I walked straight out the back doors of the ballroom, leaving their terrible world behind. The cool evening air hit my face as I approached the valet stand. I handed the attendant my ticket, feeling an incredible sense of clarity wash over me. What my family did not know was that I was not just some average corporate employee struggling to climb the ladder. I am a corporate crisis manager. I am the elite fixer that Fortune 500 companies call when their executives make multi-million-dollar mistakes. I silently clean up corporate disasters for a living, operating entirely in the shadows, and I own the most successful cybersecurity firm in the state. My phone buzzed heavily in my hand. It was a highly secure message from my lead forensic accountant, a key part of the elite team I employ at my boutique firm. I swiped open the screen. Gwen, the message read, "The deep financial audit you ordered on your father's commercial real estate firm is complete. We dug into that $5 million deal Desmond supposedly secured today. It is a complete fake. The funds are actually a fraudulent wire transfer originating directly from a cartel-linked offshore account in the Cayman Islands. And Gwen, your dad, is listed as the primary legal guarantor on the entire transaction." I stared at the glowing screen as the valet pulled my car up to the curb. Desmond did not have a legitimate venture capital firm. He had a massive money laundering operation, and he had just used my foolish father as the perfect fall guy. My father, who had just publicly humiliated me, to praise the very man who was about to send him to federal prison. I slipped the phone securely into my clutch, a slow, genuine smile finally spreading across my face. I tipped the valet generously, got into my car, and drove away into the night. The countdown to their absolute destruction had just begun, and they had absolutely no idea what was coming for them. The morning sun glared through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my father's downtown commercial real estate firm, casting long, sharp shadows across the imported Italian marble floor. I walked past the front receptionist, a young woman who immediately dropped her gaze to her keyboard. She knew better than to intercept a summons from Donovan. My phone was safely tucked inside the inner pocket of my tailored blazer. On that phone was the encrypted forensic audit of Desmond's fraudulent $5 million wire transfer, a digital bomb just waiting to be detonated. I pushed open the heavy mahogany double doors to the executive suite without knocking. My father sat behind his massive custom desk, sipping a fresh espresso, as if last night's brutal public humiliation had never even happened. He did not offer an apology. He did not even offer a basic greeting. Instead, he picked up a thick legal packet and tossed it aggressively across the polished wood surface. It slid and stopped exactly at the edge of the desk right in front of where I stood. "Sign it," he demanded, not bothering to look up from his dual computer monitors. "We are on a tight schedule this morning." I glanced down at the document. The bold header declared it an irrevocable transfer of assets. I looked around the spacious room and noticed my sister Felicity lounging on the white leather sofa in the corner. She wore oversized designer sunglasses indoors and was lazily scrolling through her social media feed, nursing a green juice. Her presence meant this was an orchestrated ambush, a coordinated family effort to extract resources from the daughter they openly despised. "What exactly is this?" I asked, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. As a corporate crisis manager, remaining perfectly stoic in hostile environments was my specialty. "It is a bridge loan," Donovan replied, finally meeting my gaze with a look of absolute, unshakable entitlement. "Desmond's new Web3 venture needs a temporary injection of liquid capital to close a massive tech acquisition by the end of the business day. We are keeping the funding entirely within the family. You are going to sign over your maternal trust fund to his holding company." All $600,000. It is a temporary gap, Gwendolyn. You will get it back with a 5% interest yield by the fourth quarter. I stared at him. The sheer audacity of the demand was almost breathtaking. Less than 12 hours ago, he had stood in front of 300 elite guests and declared I was a profound disappointment. Now he wanted my deceased mother's inheritance to fund the very man he used to humiliate me. I am not signing over my trust fund to Desmond, I stated flatly, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. I am not signing it over to anyone. Felicity scoffed loudly from the sofa, dropping her phone into her lap with a dramatic sigh. You are so unbelievably selfish, she sneered, adjusting her sunglasses on her nose. You have always been exactly this way. You would not co-sign my student loans 10 years ago when I desperately needed you to, and now you will not even help my husband when he is on the verge of making us all billionaires. You just want to hoard your little pile of money because you have absolutely nothing else in your sad life. Enjoy being alone and miserable, Gwen. I turned my head slowly to look at my younger sister. My mind flashed back a decade. I was 19 years old, working 60-hour weeks across 3 different restaurant shifts, living in a cramped studio apartment, and eating ramen noodles just to keep the electricity on. She had demanded I co-sign a $100,000 private loan so she could attend a luxury party school out of state. It was a loan she had zero intention of repaying. When I refused to ruin my credit score for her, our parents called me a traitor to the family. They ended up draining my college fund to buy her a brand new convertible instead. You are right, Felicity, I replied, my voice steady and chillingly calm. I did not pay for your 4-year vacation back then, and I am certainly not funding your husband's criminal lifestyle right now. Donovan slammed his hand flat on the desk, the espresso cup rattling violently in its saucer. You will do exactly as you are told, he barked, his face darkening. You are part of this family, and family supports each other without question. Desmond is bringing real generational wealth into this house. You owe us this money after the disgraceful way you walked out of the country club last night. I picked up the heavy legal packet. I felt the thick, expensive paper between my fingers. I walked purposefully past my father's desk, heading straight for the industrial cross-cut shredder sitting near the filing cabinets. I flicked the power switch. The machine hummed to life with a low, hungry growl. What on earth are you doing? Donovan yelled, standing up quickly from his leather chair. I fed the thick stack of papers directly into the machine. The grinding sound of metal blades tearing the legal document into thousands of tiny, unreadable ribbons filled the silent office. I watched until the very last page was destroyed. Felicity sat up straight, her mouth hanging open in pure shock. Desmond does not have a tech venture, I said, raising my voice just enough to carry over the sound of the shredder. Desmond operates a highly sophisticated Ponzi scheme. He has absolutely no legitimate investors. The $5 million he allegedly secured for your firm yesterday is a fraudulent wire transfer originating from a cartel-linked offshore account in the Cayman Islands. I ran a full forensic audit on his servers last night, and the evidence is irrefutable. Donovan's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. You have no idea what you are talking about. You are making wild accusations to ruin your sister's happiness out of pure spite. I turned off the shredder and faced him directly, meeting his furious gaze with dead calm. I am telling you that you are currently the primary legal guarantor on a massive money laundering operation. When federal agents raid his accounts, your signature is the one they will find. And as for my trust fund, I stepped closer to his desk, leaning my weight on my hands, ensuring he heard every single word. I cannot sign it over to you because the cash has been gone for 3 years. Felicity gasped loudly. You blew $600,000 on what? I bought the debt on this very office building, I said, making sure to enunciate clearly. When your firm almost went bankrupt 3 years ago, and the bank was ready to foreclose, my crisis management firm swooped in through an anonymous shell company and purchased the commercial mortgage. I am your landlord, Dad. I literally own the roof over your head. If you hand this property over to Desmond's fake shell company, the federal government will seize it, and I will be the one authorizing the immediate eviction of your entire staff. The silence in the room was absolute. Donovan stood completely frozen, the veins in his neck bulging against his starched white collar. The realization that his scapegoat daughter had been holding his financial leash for years finally crashed over him. His entire illusion of dominance was shattering in real time. But men like my father do not surrender. They escalate. Donovan's face morphed from shock into pure, unadulterated rage. He snatched his cell phone off the desk, his hands shaking violently as he unlocked the screen. "You think you are so smart?" he roared, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "You think you can commit corporate espionage against your own family and get away with it? I play golf every single Sunday with the dean of your precious business school. I am calling him right now. I will tell him you hacked my private company servers to steal proprietary information. I will have your degree revoked before lunchtime, and I will make sure you never work in corporate America again." By noon, Donovan made good on his threat. He did not just call the dean of the business school. He called every major commercial real estate developer, every bank executive, and every country club board member in our tri-state area. My phone began lighting up with messages from industry contacts asking if the rumors were true. Donovan was telling anyone who would listen that I was violently unstable, that I had embezzled my maternal trust fund, and that I was currently under investigation for corporate fraud. He was systematically trying to salt the earth so nothing I planted could ever grow. Then came Felicity. She was always the family expert at public manipulation. At 2 in the afternoon, my lead forensic accountant, Marcus, walked into my glass-walled office and turned my secondary monitor toward me. Felicity had gone live on her primary social media account. She was sitting on the floor of her walk-in closet, wearing an oversized sweater, her face completely stripped of makeup, her eyes red and puffy. She looked like the ultimate fragile victim. "I just need to speak my truth," Felicity sobbed to her 3 million followers. "My older sister is trying to destroy my life. She has always hated me, and now she is making up horrible criminal lies about my husband to ruin our marriage. She is trying to steal my father's company and tear our family apart because she cannot stand to see anyone else happy." The video already had 400,000 views. The comment section was a toxic wasteland of strangers calling me a sociopath, demanding my business be boycotted, and sending death threats to my corporate email. Marcus looked at me, his hands resting on the edge of my desk. He asked if I wanted to deploy our standard crisis response protocol, issue a legal cease and desist, or release a public statement refuting their claims with the shredded trust fund documents. I shook my head, closing the video tab with a single click. I felt my pulse slow down, a cold, calculated calm washing over me. Social media drama was for amateurs. I did not build the most ruthless corporate crisis management firm on the East Coast by engaging in public shouting matches. I became a fixer for Fortune 500 companies because I had completed a masterclass in crisis management by the time I was 18. My entire childhood was a training ground for covering up the exact type of messes my parents created. When I was 16, I spent 3 sleepless nights altering accounting ledgers to hide Donovan's illegal gambling debts before a state audit. When I was 17, I took the blame for Caroline's bounced checks at the country club, standing silently while she told the board I had stolen her checkbook to buy designer clothes. I learned early that the only way to survive in this family was to control the information, secure the perimeter, and never ever show emotion when they tried to break you. I looked up at Marcus. "Ignore the PR smear campaign," I told him. "Let them scream into the void. It is a distraction. They want us playing defense on social media, so we take our eyes off the actual money. I want you to bypass all of this noise and go straight for the jugular." Marcus nodded, sliding into the chair opposite my desk and opening his encrypted laptop. "Where do we start?" "I want everything on Desmond," I instructed, leaning forward. "I do not care about his fake venture capital website or his polished LinkedIn profile. I want the ghost data. Break into the hidden servers he uses for his offshore accounts. Trace the routing numbers from the Cayman Islands back to his personal devices. Find out who he really is, who he owes money to, and what his exact exit strategy is. when this Ponzi scheme collapses. Because men like Desmond do not scam people like my father without having a very solid backup plan. For the next 4 hours, my office was a silent war room. The only sound was the rapid clicking of keyboards as my elite team of cyber specialists systematically dismantled Desmond's digital life. We ripped through his encrypted firewalls like paper. We traced wire transfers through shell companies in Panama, mapped out phantom real estate holdings in Dubai, and decrypted a secure cloud server he had hidden under a fake corporate identity. At exactly 6 in the evening, Marcus stopped typing. He stared at his screen, his jaw tightening. "Gwen," he said, his voice unusually strained. "You need to see this." I walked around the desk and stood behind his chair. On the screen was a highly classified, heavily encrypted legal document we had just pulled from Desmond's most secure hidden drive. It was not a bank statement. It was not a real estate deed. It was a life insurance policy. I read the details, my blood running completely cold. Desmond had taken out a massive, comprehensive life insurance policy on Felicity. The payout was staggering enough to cover his cartel debts and fund a luxury lifestyle anywhere in the world. The policy specifically included clauses for accidental death and sudden tragedy. Desmond did not just view my sister as a convenient entry point into my father's bank accounts. He viewed her as his ultimate multi-million-dollar parachute. But that was not the discovery that made the breath catch in my throat. I scrolled down to the bottom of the digital document, past the terrifying payout conditions, straight to the signature lines. Desmond's signature was there, bold and arrogant. Felicity's signature was there, clearly forged, the loops and slants completely inconsistent with her actual handwriting. But right below her forged name was the signature of the primary witness and legal guarantor. It was perfectly legitimate. It was signed in crisp, unmistakable blue ink. I recognized the sharp, aggressive cursive instantly. It was the signature of my mother, Caroline. I sat at a corner booth inside Le Ciel, a Michelin-starred restaurant downtown, known for its privacy and exorbitant prices. I was sipping sparkling water and reviewing the encrypted offshore files Marcus had sent me, enjoying a rare moment of silence. That silence did not last. A shadow fell across my laptop screen. Desmond slid into the leather booth directly across from me, smoothing the lapels of his custom Italian suit with a terrifyingly arrogant grin. A second later, Felicity boxed me in. She slid into the curved banquette right beside me, smelling heavily of expensive Prosecco and pure desperation. They had tracked my location. This was a coordinated ambush. "We need to have a very serious conversation about your little crusade. Gwen." Desmond began leaning forward and resting his elbows on the pristine white tablecloth. He did not bother lowering his voice. "You have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with. I have friends on the boards of every major corporation in this city. I have politicians in my pocket. If you do not drop this ridiculous audit on your father's firm by tomorrow morning, I will personally see to it that your boutique agency is crushed. I will bleed you dry in court, and you will lose every single client you have ever fought for." He leaned back, looking me up and down with intense disgust. "Look at you, sitting alone in a restaurant on a Thursday night. No husband, no kids, no actual life. Just a bitter, lonely woman trying to tear down a real family because you could never manage to build one of your own." Felicity let out a dramatic, breathy sigh, crossing her arms over her chest. "You always ruin everything," she sneered, glaring at me like I was a piece of trash on her shoe. "It is a literal sickness with you. You cannot stand to see anyone else thriving. Remember when you completely ruined my Sweet 16 by refusing to pay for the caterer? You embarrassed me in front of all my friends because you are just a stingy, hateful person." I slowly closed my laptop, making sure the latch clicked firmly. I turned my head to look my sister dead in the eye. "I was 19 years old, Felicity." I spoke with a cold, measured precision that made her flinch. "I was working 3 back-to-back shifts at a greasy diner just to pay my own university tuition. And do you know exactly why I had to do that? Because our mother stole my college fund, the one our grandmother left specifically for me, just to buy you your first convertible. You cried because it was the wrong shade of white, and I ate ramen noodles for 2 years." Desmond scoffed loudly, waving his hand as if swatting away a fly. Ancient history, he mocked. We are talking about right now. Drop the investigation, Gwen. Give your father back the deed to his building and walk away, or I will ruin you. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of fear. Instead, I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. Desmond, I said softly, locking my eyes entirely on his. I do not think you understand the definition of ruin. I placed the document face down on the table and slid it precisely to the center right between his cocktail glass and my laptop. I flipped it over. Felicity looked down at it, her perfectly groomed brow furrowing in confusion. What is this? She asked, her voice dripping with annoyance. Desmond's smug smile vanished instantly. The color drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. He reached out to snatch the paper, but I slammed my hand down over it, pinning it to the table. That is a $10 million life insurance policy, I stated clearly, making sure every word pierced the air. It includes a very specific, highly lucrative clause for accidental death. And it was taken out on you, Felicity. Felicity stared at the paper, reading the bold print at the top. She blinked rapidly, her brain struggling to process the information. Desmond, what is she talking about? I never signed this. We do not have life insurance. I leaned closer to her, keeping my hand firmly over the document. No, you did not sign it. Your signature is completely forged. The loops and slants are completely wrong. But do you want to know the absolute best part? Look at the witness signature right at the bottom of the page. The person who legally verified that you agreed to this policy. Felicity traced the line with her manicured finger. Her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes widened in absolute horror as she stared at the sharp, aggressive cursive ink. That is Mom's handwriting, she whispered, her voice shaking. I nodded, maintaining my unbroken stare on Desmond, who was now sweating visibly through his expensive suit. Our mother helped him forge a policy that directly profits from your death, Felicity. Your husband does not have a tech venture. He owes millions to a cartel. They are bleeding our father dry, and you are his $10 million exit strategy. Did you really think he married you for your personality? You are worth far more to him dead than alive. Desmond lunged across the table to grab my throat, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. I did not flinch, but I snatched the paper back and slipped it into my jacket. Felicity's eyes darted wildly around the restaurant. Her chest began to heave. The reality of her fake perfect life was collapsing around her in real time. Her wealthy husband was a fraud planning her murder. Her devoted mother was a willing accomplice. Everything she believed about her golden existence was a lie. But instead of turning her anger toward the man who planned to profit from her demise, her lifelong psychological programming kicked in. The cognitive dissonance was too heavy. She could not accept that she was the victim of her own husband and mother, so she resorted to her default defense mechanism. She had to destroy me. Felicity grabbed the heavy serrated steak knife resting next to her untouched dinner plate. Before I could even register her movement or grab her wrist, she dragged the serrated edge violently across her own left forearm. Blood immediately welled up from the deep cut, spilling thick and red onto the pristine white tablecloth. She dropped the bloody knife directly into my lap, staining my skirt. She knocked her water glass over, letting it shatter on the floor, and opened her mouth. Her scream was deafening. It was a high-pitched, terrifying shriek that brought the entire restaurant to a dead halt. Waiters dropped their trays. Diners jumped out of their booths. "Help me!" Felicity sobbed hysterically, clutching her bleeding arm and pointing a trembling, blood-stained finger right at my face. "Somebody call the police. My sister is trying to kill me." The chaotic aftermath of Felicity's scream turned the exclusive dining room into absolute bedlam. Diners scrambled out of their booths, knocking over chairs and shattering expensive wine glasses in their rush to get away from our table. Waiters froze in terror. Desmond immediately sprang into action, playing the role of the horrified protective husband. He grabbed a cloth napkin and pressed it against Felicity's bleeding arm, shouting for someone to call the police. He looked at me with a perfectly crafted expression of terror and disgust. Within 3 minutes, the wail of sirens pierced the downtown air. The flashing red and blue lights reflected wildly off the restaurant's dark glass windows. Two police officers burst through the front doors, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. "Over here," Desmond yelled, pointing a blood-stained finger directly at my face. "She stabbed my wife." Before the officers could even approach the table, the heavy front doors swung open again. Donovan and Caroline rushed into the restaurant, panting and wide-eyed. Their arrival was far too perfectly timed. Desmond had clearly texted them to wait in a car nearby, bringing them in as backup for his initial blackmail attempt. Now they were stepping right into an active crime scene. Caroline took one look at the blood on the tablecloth and threw herself onto the floor next to Felicity. She began sobbing with theatrical chest-heaving wails. She looked up at the officers, her face twisted in an agonizing mask of maternal grief. "Arrest her right now," Caroline screamed, pointing violently at me. "My oldest daughter is a complete psychopath. She just tried to murder my baby." The lead officer stepped forward, commanding everyone to step back and lower their voices. He unholstered his taser, keeping it pointed toward the floor near my feet. Caroline ignored his instructions, clinging desperately to his uniform sleeve. "You have to lock her up," Caroline cried, putting on the performance of a lifetime. "She has always been incredibly violent and unstable. We had to send her away to a disciplinary boarding school in another state just to keep her sister safe. She is a monster." I sat perfectly still, staring at the woman who gave birth to me. I did not flinch at the lie. I did not raise my voice to defend myself. My parents had not sent me away because I was a violent child. They had shipped me off to a grim state-funded residential school 300 miles away because Donovan had lost $250,000 at a baccarat table. They simply did not want to pay for my food and basic upkeep at home. It was infinitely cheaper to make me a ward of the state, while they continued paying their country club dues and maintaining their wealthy facade. "Ma'am," the lead officer said, looking directly at me. "Stand up very slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them." I did exactly as instructed. I stood up, raising both of my hands in the air, palms open and perfectly steady. The bloody steak knife remained in my lap, sliding off my ruined skirt and clattering loudly onto the hardwood floor. "Officer, I am not going to move," I stated, my voice echoing with a cold, unwavering authority. "I am completely unarmed and I am the victim of a highly coordinated setup." Desmond scoffed loudly, telling the cops I was having a psychotic break. I ignored him entirely. I raised one hand slightly higher and pointed a single finger toward the ceiling, directing the officer's attention to the sleek black dome tucked discreetly behind the main crystal chandelier. "I handle corporate crisis management for this exact restaurant chain," I said, ensuring my voice carried across the silent dining room. "Last week, I personally oversaw a comprehensive security overhaul across all their flagship locations. What you are looking at is a brand new 4K resolution audio-enabled surveillance system. It covers every single inch of this dining room with absolutely zero blind spots." The color instantly drained from Caroline's face. Felicity's fake hysterical sobbing caught sharply in her throat. Desmond took a slow, panicked step backward. I turned my attention to the restaurant manager, who was hovering terrified near the hostess stand. "Bring me the master tablet with the security feed," I commanded. The manager scrambled to comply, rushing over and handing the tablet to the lead officer. I gave the officer the exact timestamp to check. The two cops huddled around the glowing screen, their expressions shifting from tense suspicion to absolute bewilderment. The high-definition footage played flawlessly. It captured crystal-clear video and pristine audio of the entire ambush. It showed Desmond leaning over the table, threatening to crush my business. It recorded me exposing the fraudulent life insurance policy. And then in undeniable, ultra-high definition, the camera caught Felicity grabbing the steak knife, deliberately slicing open her own arm, dropping the weapon into my lap and knocking over her water glass before initiating her fake scream. The lead officer locked the tablet screen and looked up. His demeanor had shifted entirely. He holstered his taser and pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. He walked straight past me and grabbed Felicity by her uninjured arm. Felicity began to shriek in genuine panic as the cold metal clamped down around her wrists. The officer loudly read her Miranda rights, officially placing her under arrest for filing a false police report, fabricating physical evidence, and staging a crime scene. Desmond tried to back away toward the exit, but the second officer put a firm hand on his chest, instructing him to stay exactly where he was, pending further questioning. Caroline completely lost her mind. She was screaming, grabbing at the officers, threatening to sue the entire police department and demanding they unhand her precious daughter. While the police were thoroughly occupied with dragging a hysterical Felicity toward the doors and managing my volatile parents, I quietly picked up the master tablet from the table. I scrubbed back through the security footage, shifting my view to the wider camera angle that captured the entire dining room during the initial chaos of Felicity's scream. I watched the screen closely. When Felicity shrieked and everyone in the restaurant jumped up in panic, the camera caught Donovan slipping behind my chair. While my attention was entirely focused on the blood and the knife in my lap, my father had leaned over my open leather tote bag. With a swift, practiced motion, I watched him slip a small silver thumb drive into the side pocket of my purse. He was trying to plant evidence. The realization clicked into place instantly. This entire dinner was a distraction. Felicity's dramatic self-harm was not just a panic response. It was a calculated diversion. Donovan had used the absolute chaos to plant stolen data on me, ensuring he could make good on his threat to frame me for corporate espionage. I slipped the tablet back onto the table, a dark, dangerous smile forming on my lips. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. I walked out of the restaurant without a single backward glance. Behind me, Felicity was still screaming in the back of a police cruiser, while Caroline violently berated the arresting officers. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped into my waiting car. I reached into my leather tote bag, sliding my hand into the side pocket. My fingers brushed against the cold metal of the silver thumb drive Donovan had dropped there just 20 minutes prior. I did not drive to my pristine townhouse. I drove straight to the underground, highly secure server facility that housed the operational core of my cybersecurity firm. Marcus was already waiting for me when I swiped my biometric access card. I placed the silver drive directly into a sterile anti-static evidence bag and handed it to him. Air gap it. I instructed, walking past the rows of humming servers toward our primary isolated terminal. Keep it completely disconnected from any external networks. We do not know what kind of malicious payload my father thinks he just planted on me. Before Marcus could even plug the drive into the containment terminal, my private cell phone began to vibrate. The caller ID flashed Donovan's name. I answered the call and put it on speakerphone, letting the audio echo through the sterile glass room. "You are going to regret what you just did to your sister," Donovan hissed. His voice was low, vibrating with a frantic, desperate rage. "I have my legal team rushing down to the precinct right now to bail her out, but you have crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed." "I did not touch her," I replied, my voice perfectly level. She sliced her own arm open. The cameras caught every single frame. Donovan let out a dark, breathless laugh. "The cameras did not catch everything, Gwendolyn. Check the side pocket of your purse." I met Marcus's eyes across the room. He gave me a slow nod. "I know exactly what you did, Dad. I saw you drop the drive." "Good." Donovan sneered, his arrogance immediately returning. "Then you need to listen to me very carefully. That drive is loaded with highly classified stolen federal data. It contains proprietary government contracts and compromised SEC filings. Possessing it is a federal crime carrying a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years. By tomorrow morning, I am calling my contacts at the FBI to submit an anonymous tip that a rogue corporate crisis manager is hoarding stolen intelligence. They will raid your office, tear your entire boutique firm down to the studs, and put you in federal prison." I remained completely silent, letting him dig his own grave. "There is only one way out of this for you," he continued, his voice dripping with pure malice. "You are going to sign over the deed to my office building first thing tomorrow morning. You are going to transfer the property back to my commercial real estate firm free and clear. If you do that, I will tell you exactly how to wipe the drive so the feds find nothing." "You really think a cheap blackmail attempt is going to force me to hand over a multi-million-dollar asset?" I asked. "I know it will," Donovan replied coldly, "because you have always folded. You have always buckled under pressure when I squeeze you. You are exactly the same weak, pathetic girl you were when you were 17. Remember that night, Gwendolyn? Remember when I totaled the company car after drinking half a bottle of scotch? I told you to take the blame for the crash, and you did it. You sat in that police station shivering and crying, and you confessed to a hit and run you never committed just because I ordered you to. You took the fall to save my reputation then, and you will take the fall now. Sign the deed over or your life is completely over. He hung up before I could respond. The dial tone echoed loudly in the quiet lab. I looked at Marcus. He was staring at the phone with absolute disgust. "Break it open," I commanded, turning my attention back to the isolated terminal. "Let us see what highly classified government secrets my father managed to steal." Marcus ran the drive through our highest-grade decryption software. The progress bar loaded quickly, bypassing the amateur security encryption Donovan had installed. My father was a commercial real estate developer, not a cybersecurity expert. He relied on intimidation, not sophisticated code. The firewall collapsed in less than 40 seconds. Marcus opened the main directory. There were no defense contracts. There were no compromised SEC filings. There were no stolen government secrets of any kind. Gwen Marcus said, a slow, disbelieving smirk spreading across his face. He grabbed the wrong drive. I leaned over his shoulder and stared at the glowing monitor. Donovan had panicked. In his rush to frame me during the restaurant chaos, he had reached into his pocket and planted a silver thumb drive. But he had planted his own personal, highly guarded flash drive. The screen was filled with thousands of rows of financial data. It was Donovan's shadow ledger. I scrolled through 10 years of meticulously documented, double-kept books. The spreadsheet detailed millions of dollars in unreported income, illegal offshore accounts, bribed city officials, and fraudulent tax returns. It was the holy grail of corporate fraud. He had tried to plant a bomb to destroy my life, but in his utter arrogance, he had handed me the exact instrument needed to end his own. This single drive was enough to dismantle his commercial real estate empire and send him to federal prison for the rest of his natural life. "Run a cross-reference on all recurring offshore wire transfers," I instructed Marcus, feeling a genuine surge of adrenaline. "If he is hiding money, I want to know exactly where it is going." Marcus ran a sorting algorithm on the master ledger, filtering the data by outgoing monthly payments. A specific, highly encrypted routing number immediately flagged on the system. It was a massive recurring expense. Every single month for the past 7 years, Donovan had been wiring exactly $50,000 from a hidden corporate account. "Trace the destination," I ordered. Marcus's fingers flew across the keyboard, pinging the routing number against global healthcare and banking databases. The destination was not a tropical tax haven or a high-yield investment account. The money was being funneled directly into an exclusive, highly classified private psychiatric facility located just outside the state lines. I stared at the screen, my brow furrowing. I leaned closer, reading the confidential billing manifesto attached to the routing numbers. The monthly payments were not a charitable donation. They were designated for a high-security permanent resident. And the guarantor name attached to the patient file, the person legally authorizing the extreme psychiatric hold, was Caroline. My mother was secretly funding a permanent resident in a psychiatric ward, using Donovan's embezzled money. The countdown to their destruction had just taken a very dark turn, and I was about to find out exactly who they had locked away. The annual Heritage Foundation Gala was the crown jewel of my family's social calendar. It was a spectacular display of manufactured philanthropy, a place where the city's elite gathered to drink overpriced champagne and pretend they cared about the less fortunate. I navigated the crowded ballroom of the Grand Plaza Hotel in a sleek emerald green evening gown. I was not there to socialize. I was there to hunt. I spotted Caroline immediately. She was holding court near a towering ice sculpture draped in diamonds that were undoubtedly purchased with Donovan's embezzled funds. She was soaking up the attention of 3 wealthy socialites, laughing that high artificial laugh she practiced in the mirror. I glided through the crowd, stepping smoothly into her circle. I leaned in close, keeping my voice light and conversational, so her audience would suspect nothing. "We need to talk, Caroline," I whispered, my lips barely brushing her ear. Privately. Right now. She stiffened, her fake smile freezing in place. Gwendolyn, how incredibly inappropriate. I am in the middle of a very important conversation. I have the offshore shadow ledger. I interrupted, my tone dropping to a lethal, icy pitch. And I know exactly what you have been doing with $50,000 a month at the Blackwood Institute. VIP Room B. You have 2 minutes, or I hand the unredacted files to the investigative journalist standing by the bar. The blood completely drained from her face. Her champagne flute trembled so violently that a drop spilled onto her designer gown. She quickly excused herself to her friends, citing a sudden migraine, and followed me down the dimly lit, velvet-lined hallway. I opened the heavy mahogany door of VIP Room B and ushered her inside. The moment the latch clicked shut, the heavy bass of the ballroom orchestra was entirely cut off. The room was perfectly soundproofed. Caroline immediately went on the offensive, her panic manifesting as pure, arrogant venom. "You are completely out of your mind," she snarled, pacing the expensive Persian rug. "First, you violently frame your own sister, and now you are threatening me at a charity event. You have always been a deeply disturbed girl. Donovan is going to have you locked up for this." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply unclasped my evening clutch, pulled out a thick stack of folded bank statements, and tossed them onto the glass coffee table. I isolated Donovan's flash drive, I stated clearly. He thought he was planting stolen government data on me to trigger an FBI raid. Instead, he handed me a decade of his own tax evasion and offshore embezzlement. But that is just his problem. This is yours. I tapped the top page. Caroline's eyes darted downward. There, highlighted in stark yellow ink, were the recurring transfers to the Blackwood Institute, a private, highly secretive psychiatric facility. Right next to the transfer logs were copies of the authorization forms. They bore Caroline's unmistakable signature. "You are the legal guarantor," I said, backing her into a corner. "You have been funneling Donovan's stolen money to keep someone permanently locked inside a padded room under your explicit medical authority. That makes you a direct accessory to fraud, money laundering, and unlawful imprisonment." Caroline stared at the papers. Her carefully constructed facade shattered into a million pieces. Her hands shook violently. She collapsed onto the leather sofa, burying her face in her hands. When she looked up, her eyes were wild, entirely stripped of their usual arrogant polish. "You do not understand," she choked out, her voice cracking under the weight of her impending ruin. "I had to do it. I had to secure my place. You have absolutely no idea what it was like living in this family with you." I crossed my arms, looking down at her. "Living with me. You sent me away to boarding school. You treated me like a disease from the day I was born. Because you are exactly like her." Caroline screamed, the raw, ugly truth finally erupting from her chest. "You are the spitting image of Donovan's first wife, Evelyn." I froze. My biological mother. A woman who died when I was barely a year old, leaving Caroline the mistress who had been waiting in the wings to swoop in, marry Donovan, and raise me as a reluctant obligation before giving birth to Felicity. Evelyn was perfect. Caroline spat, tears ruining her expensive makeup. She was fiercely independent. She was brilliant. She built the foundation of that commercial real estate firm with Donovan, and he worshipped the ground she walked on. I was just the secretary. I was the dirty little secret who constantly felt inferior. When she died and I finally got the ring, I thought I had won. But then I had to look at you. Every single day you grew to look more like her. You walked like her. You refused to bow down just like her. You were a walking, breathing reminder that I would always be second best. Caroline reached out, her hands trembling as she tried to grasp my wrist in a pathetic bid for sympathy. I was terrified, Gwendolyn. Donovan never looked at me the way he looked at Evelyn, and you were her ghost haunting my house. I just wanted my own daughter Felicity to be the favorite. I just wanted to feel like I belonged. I stepped back smoothly, letting her hands grasp empty air. I looked down at her with absolute ice in my veins. "You hated me for looking like her," I said, delivering the words with surgical precision. But you certainly loved spending the inheritance she left me. Caroline flinched violently, as if I had struck her across the face. Do not play the victim, I continued coldly, shutting down any remaining trace of her performance. You resented Evelyn's brilliance, but you used her money to buy your country club memberships and Felicity's designer cars. You are not a tragically insecure woman. You are a parasite. Realizing that playing on my sympathies had completely failed, pure survival instinct kicked in. Caroline's eyes darted toward the heavy mahogany door, then back to the bank statements on the table. She knew I had enough concrete evidence to send her to federal prison alongside her husband. She needed a bargaining chip, and she needed it immediately. Wait, Caroline gasped, scrambling to her feet, her voice dropping to a frantic, terrified pitch. Wait, Gwendolyn. If you turn those files over to the authorities right now, I go down with him. But I can give you something better. I can give you the key to completely destroying Donovan. I raised an eyebrow, waiting in silence. You think that $50,000 a month is just for some random relative we hid away? Caroline whispered, her chest heaving. You think I authorized that psychiatric hold just for fun? She grabbed the bank statements, pointing a shaking, manicured finger at the Blackwood Institute logo at the top of the page. 10 years ago, Donovan's business partner, Arthur Vance, supposedly died in a tragic boating accident. Caroline said, her breath hitching with genuine terror. He did not die, Gwendolyn. He found out Donovan was embezzling from the firm. He was going to the authorities to blow the whistle. I stared at her, the gravity of her words, shifting the very foundation of the room. There was no boating accident, Caroline confessed, tears streaming down her face as she handed me the ultimate murder weapon against my father. Donovan had Arthur drugged, declared legally incompetent, and committed to the Blackwood Institute. I signed the paperwork as a proxy. Arthur has been locked in a private asylum for 10 years, and Donovan stole his entire half of the company. I left Caroline sobbing on the expensive Persian rug of the VIP room. I did not waste another breath on her pathetic excuses or her manufactured tears. I walked out of the Grand Plaza Hotel, the heavy bass of the ballroom orchestra fading into the cold night air, and immediately dialed Marcus. I told him to draft an ironclad, irrevocable transfer of corporate ownership and send it directly to my encrypted tablet. I needed a legal weapon that would completely obliterate my father's empire. The Blackwood Institute was located 50 miles outside the city limits, hidden behind towering wrought iron gates and a dense, oppressive perimeter of old pine trees. It did not look like a hospital. It looked like a fortress designed to keep secrets permanently buried. I parked my car near the front entrance, grabbed my leather tote bag, and marched straight into the brightly lit lobby. The facility was brutally sterile. The air smelled of heavy bleach, synthetic lavender, and manufactured calm. The receptionist behind the thick glass partition was a stone-faced woman who immediately held up a hand as I approached. She cited strict privacy laws and a concrete no-visitor policy mandated directly by the guarantor Caroline. She told me to leave the premises immediately or she would call security. I did not back down. I pulled out my corporate crisis management credentials and slammed them onto the marble counter right next to a glowing federal fraud investigation docket Marcus had hastily mocked up on my tablet screen. I am a federally appointed forensic auditor, I lied flawlessly, my voice echoing with absolute, unquestionable authority. Arthur Vance is a material witness in a massive offshore embezzlement investigation. You are currently holding him under a medical proxy signed by a woman who is about to be indicted for wire fraud and money laundering. If you do not open Ward C and grant me access to my witness right this second, I will have a team of federal marshals dismantle this entire facility by dawn. You will be named as a direct accomplice in a federal kidnapping scheme. The receptionist swallowed hard. Her arrogant posture crumbled instantly. She swiped her master keycard across the terminal, and the heavy magnetic locks on the inner doors buzzed open. I navigated the maze of stark white hallways until I reached room 412. I looked through the reinforced observation glass embedded in the door. The man sitting quietly by the barred window did not look like a raving lunatic. He looked like a prisoner of war. Arthur Vance was terribly thin, his hair entirely white, but his posture remained rigid with a defiant, unbroken dignity. I pushed the heavy door open. It clicked shut behind me, sealing us in the quiet room. Arthur turned his head slowly. He looked at my face, and a sudden sharp recognition flashed in his bright, completely lucid eyes. He did not ask who I was. He stood up, smoothing the front of his clinical gray shirt. "You have your mother's eyes," Arthur stated, his voice raspy from years of underuse but vibrating with absolute clarity. "Fierce, unyielding. Your father always despised that you could not be bought. It absolutely terrified him." I stepped further into the room, maintaining intense eye contact. "You are entirely sane," I said. Arthur gave a grim, humorless nod. "I have spent 10 long years spitting their chemical restraints into a paper cup. Donovan needed me declared legally incompetent so his new wife could sign over my half of the commercial real estate firm. He staged that boating accident, paid off a highly corrupt private medical board, and locked me in this gilded cage to steal my life's work. He knew I had discovered his tax evasion. I was going to turn him in to the federal authorities the very next morning. "I am tearing his cage down tonight," I replied, pulling my digital tablet and a biometric stylus from my bag. "I need your proxy. Donovan thinks he owns the empire because Caroline controls your medical and financial rights. But a fraudulent medical proxy does not override a direct, lucid transfer of corporate voting shares executed in the presence of a federal auditor." I placed the glowing tablet on the small table between us. I pulled up the legal document Marcus had prepared. "Sign over your original proxy voting rights to me, Arthur," I commanded softly. "Give me the legal authority to call an emergency board meeting. I will launch a hostile takeover of Donovan's entire firm by tomorrow morning. I will gut his empire from the inside out, and I will personally walk you out of those front gates a free man." Arthur did not hesitate for a single second. He stepped forward and took the stylus from my hand. His grip was remarkably steady as he signed his name, executing the digital transfer with a bold, aggressive stroke. The biometric seal locked the document into the system. It was done. I now legally controlled 50% of Donovan's empire. It was the ultimate kill switch. "Pack whatever you want to keep," I told Arthur, securing the tablet back into my bag. "I am bringing my private security team back here in exactly 2 hours to process your official medical release. Be ready." I walked out of the room, my heart pounding with a cold, triumphant rhythm. I strode down the sterile hallways, pushed through the heavy glass doors of the lobby, and stepped out into the dark, freezing parking lot. I did not make it to my car. 3 black SUVs suddenly roared out from the shadows, boxing in my vehicle perfectly. Their high beams flashed on, blinding me in the darkness. The heavy doors swung open in aggressive unison. 4 massive men stepped out, their faces obscured by the harsh glare, moving with a synchronized, predatory grace. They were Desmond's hired thugs. The lead man stepped forward, blocking my path entirely. His thick hand rested ominously on a heavy metal object concealed inside his dark leather jacket. "Desmond sends his regards," the man growled, stepping into the halo of the security lights. "He knows exactly where you are and what you just took. Hand over the tablet and the proxy papers right now, or you are not walking out of this parking lot alive." I stared at the massive man blocking my path. The freezing wind whipped across the dark parking lot, cutting through my thin evening gown, but my blood ran completely hot. I did not step back. I did not cower. I tightened my grip on the leather tote bag resting against my side. "You are making a very poor calculation," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. "You are standing in the middle of a private psychiatric facility parking lot, demanding legally binding corporate documents. You are entirely out of your depth." The lead thug let out a harsh, guttural laugh. He did not say a word. Instead, he snapped his fingers. The man to his right pulled a heavy steel tactical baton from his jacket, stepped past me, and swung it with brutal force into the driver's side window of my car. The tempered glass shattered instantly, raining sharp crystals over the asphalt and the leather seats inside. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet night. The lead man stepped closer, invading my personal space. The stench of stale tobacco and cheap cologne rolled off his jacket. "We are not negotiating with you, sweetheart," he growled. He pulled a heavy matte black pistol from his coat and aimed it directly at my stomach. "Hand over the bag." "Desmond wants the proxy papers and he wants the flash drive. If I have to shoot you and take it off your bleeding body, I will do it without a second thought." I looked down at the barrel of the gun, then back up into his dark, aggressive eyes. I did not scream. I did not drop to my knees. The physiological response they expected from a terrified woman never came. My father used to lock me in the basement when I talked back. I stated my voice echoing with pure, absolute ice. He would turn off the power lock, the deadbolt, and leave me to freeze in the damp dark for days just to break my spirit. "Do you really think breaking a window and waving a cheap handgun scares me? You are nothing but errand boys." Before he could process my total lack of fear, I raised my left wrist. I pressed my thumb firmly against the hidden biometric panic button integrated into the side of my smartwatch. It took exactly 3 seconds for the cavalry to arrive. "I run a high-level cybersecurity firm that handles corporate espionage and digital warfare," I said, a dark smile spreading across my face. "Did you honestly believe I would drive to a remote asylum in the middle of the night without my standard security escort?" The dark perimeter of the parking lot suddenly erupted in blinding high-intensity tactical strobes. 6 heavily armed private security contractors stepped out from the shadows of the pine trees, their assault rifles raised, and laser sights locked directly onto the chests of Desmond's hired men. Red dots danced wildly across the lead thug's leather jacket. "Drop the weapon," my lead contractor barked, his voice amplified by a megaphone. "Drop it right now or you will be neutralized." The thugs froze. The sheer tactical superiority was overwhelming. These were not street brawlers. These were highly trained former military operatives who guarded billions of dollars in corporate assets. The lead thug slowly lowered his pistol, dropping it onto the asphalt. His 3 companions immediately raised their hands in the air, backing away from my shattered car. "Kick the gun away," I commanded. He obliged, kicking the heavy weapon into the darkness. "Now," I said, stepping right up to the man who had just threatened my life. "Pull out your phone. Call your boss. Put him on speakerphone." The man hesitated, glancing at the 6 laser sights still trained on his chest and head. He reached into his pocket with trembling fingers, unlocked his phone, and dialed Desmond's number. He tapped the speaker icon and held the phone out. Desmond answered on the first ring, his voice frantic and breathless. "Did you get it? Did you get the drive and the papers? Tell me you handled her." "Your boys ran into a slight logistical issue, Desmond," I said, leaning closer to the phone. "They brought a steel baton to a tactical standoff." I could hear Desmond stop breathing on the other end of the line. "Gwendolyn," he choked out, absolute terror creeping into his tone. I looked at the lead thug and gave him a sharp nod. "Tell him exactly what is happening right now," I ordered. "Boss," the thug stammered, his tough facade completely gone. He was practically hyperventilating. "We are surrounded. They have rifles on us. Please, you have to tell her to let us go. They are going to kill us right here in the parking lot. Please just tell her to call them off." The sound of a grown, aggressive man begging for his life echoed through the phone speaker. Desmond began to hyperventilate on his end of the line. The perfectly groomed, arrogant fraud who had sat in the Michelin-starred restaurant demanding my submission was completely unraveling. "I am walking out of here with the flash drive and the proxy papers," I said, projecting my voice clearly into the microphone. "Tomorrow morning, I am seizing control of Donovan's company, and then I am handing the tax evasion files directly to the federal authorities. You and my sister are going to lose everything." The cognitive dissonance broke Desmond. The reality of his impending destruction shattered whatever filter he had left. "Just get the papers!" Desmond shrieked, his voice cracking hysterically on the recorded line. "If the company goes under, the cartel will kill my other family in Atlanta." The parking lot went dead silent. The only sound was the freezing wind whistling through the pine trees. I stared at the phone, my mind rapidly processing the catastrophic confession he had just made. Desmond had not just married my sister for her money. He had married her to pay off a cartel debt to save a completely separate secret family living in Atlanta. Felicity was not just a pawn in a life insurance scheme. She was the unwitting financial shield for a shadow family living 3 states away. I pressed the end call button on the thug's phone. I slipped my smartwatch into recording lock mode, securely saving Desmond's frantic confession to my encrypted cloud server. The ultimate checkmate had just fallen right into my hands. I left the frozen parking lot of the Blackwood Institute and went straight to the private airstrip. My security team secured the proxy papers, and Arthur Vance transferring him to a safe house. I boarded my chartered jet. The flight to Atlanta took less than 2 hours. I used that time to track the financial breadcrumbs Desmond had so carelessly dropped. With Marcus feeding me satellite data and property records pinpointing Desmond's shadow life was almost too easy. By sunrise, I was standing on the cracked sidewalk of a remarkably ordinary suburban neighborhood in Atlanta. The house was a modest, single-story ranch with faded blue shutters and a tricycle resting on the front lawn. It was a stark contrast to the multi-million-dollar penthouse Desmond shared with my sister Felicity. I walked up the driveway. Through the sheer living room curtains, I saw a woman pouring cereal for 3 young children. I knocked on the front door. The woman who answered wiped her hands on a dish towel. She looked tired, her eyes bearing the heavy bags of a solo parent, but she offered a polite, confused smile. She asked if I was lost. "I am looking for Desmond's wife." I stated, my voice completely devoid of hostility. The woman straightened up, her smile shifting into a guarded frown. "I am his wife." "Sarah, is something wrong? Did something happen to him on his deployment?" Deployment. The lie hit me like a physical blow. Desmond was not just hiding a family. He had constructed an entire fictional reality, playing the noble absent soldier to justify his life in another state with my sister. I stepped inside before she could close the door, holding up my federal forensic auditing credentials. "Desmond is not in the military, Sarah," I said, maintaining absolute eye contact. "He is a corporate fraud who married into my father's commercial real estate empire. He lives in a penthouse, drives a sports car, and uses stolen money to fund this house." Sarah shook her head violently, backing away as her 3 children stared from the kitchen table. She threatened to call the police, claiming I was a crazy person trying to ruin her husband's honorable reputation. I did not argue. I simply pulled a thick file from my tote bag and dropped it onto her worn coffee table. "Look at the bank routing numbers," I commanded softly. "The deposits paying your mortgage every month do not come from the Department of Defense. They come from a shell corporation tied to a commercial real estate firm. Specifically, a firm currently being investigated for cartel money laundering." Sarah stared at the highlighted bank statements. Her hands began to tremble. I watched the devastating realization wash over her face. She was not a conspirator. She was a casualty. Looking at her, I felt a sharp, bitter echo of my own past. I remembered sitting in my childhood bedroom watching my father lie straight to my face about where his money came from, hiding his illicit ledgers behind a mask of paternal authority. Donovan had weaponized my trust to protect his assets. Desmond had weaponized Sarah's trust to protect his life. He told me his classified clearance meant we could not file taxes jointly. Sarah whispered, tears spilling over her eyelashes. "He told me he was protecting us. He is using you as a human shield." I corrected, my tone sharpening. "Yesterday, he explicitly told armed thugs that if his embezzlement scheme collapses, the cartel will come after this specific house. He sold your safety to buy himself time." Sarah collapsed onto the sofa, pulling her knees to her chest. She looked at her children in the kitchen, pure terror replacing her shock. She asked me what she was supposed to do, assuming I was there to seize her home and throw her in prison. "I am not here to destroy you," I said, sitting down across from her. "I am here to offer you a way out." Sarah looked up, completely stunned. "My father and Desmond thrive by keeping women in the dark and forcing them to take the fall." I explained, my voice absolute and steady. "I am breaking that cycle today. I have a team of federal marshals and private security contractors on standby. If you hand over every document, every text message, and every financial record Desmond ever gave you and agree to testify against him in open court, I will grant you full federal immunity. I will personally relocate you and your children to a secure property fully funded where Desmond and his cartel associates can never find you." Sarah stared at me, the gravity of the choice hanging in the quiet living room. She looked back at her children. The maternal instinct overrode her fear. She stood up, marched over to a locked filing cabinet in the corner of the room, and handed me a heavy metal lockbox containing 10 years of Desmond's financial lies. "Take him down," Sarah said, her voice shaking but resolute. I nodded, securing the lockbox inside my bag. Before I could even step off Sarah's front porch, my phone began vibrating frantically. The caller ID flashed Marcus's name. I answered immediately, stepping into the waiting black SUV my security team had parked at the curb. "We have a massive situation," Marcus said, his voice tense with urgency. Donovan's legal team worked through the night. They pulled every dirty favor they had. Felicity is out on bail. I scoffed. "Let her be out. She is an accessory to fraud, and her husband is currently running from the cartel." "You do not understand," Marcus interrupted. "Turn on the news. Right now." I pulled out my tablet and tapped into the live news feed. The screen illuminated with a breaking news banner. Felicity was standing on the steps of the federal courthouse, surrounded by a swarm of reporters and microphones. She looked perfectly styled for the role of a tragic victim, wearing a modest conservative dress, her hair pulled back, completely stripped of her usual flashy jewelry. Tears streamed down her perfectly powdered cheeks as she gripped a tissue. "My sister Gwendolyn has always been deeply unstable," Felicity sobbed into the cameras, her voice cracking with manufactured heartbreak. "She violently attacked me at a restaurant, framed my innocent husband, and is trying to destroy our family's legacy out of pure vindictive jealousy. But what makes this so incredibly cruel is that she knows my medical condition." Felicity placed a protective, trembling hand over her flat stomach. "I am 2 months pregnant," she announced to the flash of a dozen cameras. "Gwendolyn is trying to send a pregnant woman to federal prison and leave my unborn child without a father." I stared at the screen, my grip tightening on the tablet. Felicity had weaponized the media, turning my meticulous legal trap into a public witch hunt. She was daring me to destroy a pregnant woman on live television. The battle had just moved from the boardroom to the court of public opinion, and my sister had just fired the opening shot. I did not waste a single second screaming at the tablet screen. I instructed my security team to secure Sarah and her children, then ordered my pilot to file an immediate flight plan back to the city. By the time my jet touched the tarmac, Felicity had already escalated her public relations stunt into a full-scale catered media circus. She had rented the entire glass atrium of the Botanical Gardens for an impromptu, highly publicized baby shower to solidify her victim narrative. The venue was a sickening display of manufactured innocence. Pastel balloon arches framed the entrance, cascading floral arrangements covered every table, and waiters circulated with crystal trays of non-alcoholic sparkling cider. At least 4 local news crews had their cameras set up around the perimeter, broadcasting the spectacle live. Felicity sat in an oversized velvet chair in the center of the room, dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. She was flanked by her wealthy friends, who were cooing over her and glaring at the cameras. Donovan stood at a podium near the front, speaking into a microphone adorned with the logo of a major news network. His voice echoed through the atrium, thick with practiced theatrical grief. "My eldest daughter, Gwendolyn, is a sociopath," Donovan declared, looking directly into the primary camera lens. "She has completely lost her grip on reality. She is fabricating wild, baseless accusations to steal my company and destroy her sister's life. Gwendolyn knows the extreme stress this causes. She knows the medical risks. She is actively trying to stress my innocent pregnant daughter into a miscarriage out of pure vindictive spite." The crowd of socialites gasped in rehearsed horror. Camera shutters clicked rapidly, capturing the image of the protective patriarch defending his vulnerable child. I stepped through the heavy glass doors of the atrium. The sheer audacity of his lie fueled the cold fire burning in my chest. I did not try to blend in. I walked straight down the center aisle, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. Before I could reach the podium, a hand gripped my arm with bruising force. Caroline pulled me hard behind a towering wall of white orchids out of the direct line of sight of the press. Her face was flushed, her teeth bared in a desperate, ugly snarl. "What is wrong with you?" Caroline hissed, her fingers digging into my skin. Why can you not just let her have this one thing? Let her have a fake pregnancy to avoid federal prison. I asked, my voice completely devoid of emotion. She is securing this family's future. Caroline spat her eyes wild with venom. Something you could never do. Why are you trying to ruin this? Is it because you are barren? Is it because you could never give us grandchildren anyway? Her words were meant to be a kill shot. They were meant to paralyze me with the same profound shame I felt 5 years ago. I clearly remembered waking up in a sterile hospital room after severe complications from endometriosis, forced an emergency hysterectomy. I remembered Caroline standing at the foot of my bed, looking down at me with absolute disgust, sighing that I was broken goods, who could not even fulfill the basic biological duty of a wife. They had mocked me for it behind closed doors for years, treating my medical trauma as a personal failing. But I was no longer that scared, heavily medicated girl seeking her approval. I looked at Caroline's hand on my arm, then back up to her face. My expression did not change. My medical history is not a weapon you can use against me anymore, Caroline, I stated coldly, ripping my arm out of her grasp. And your daughter is not carrying a child. She is carrying a lie that is about to send her husband to a federal penitentiary. I stepped out from behind the orchids and walked directly up the steps to the stage. Donovan saw me coming and froze mid-sentence, the color completely drained from his face. He reached out to turn off the microphone, but my lead security contractor stepped forward, physically blocking his hand from the console. I stood at the podium looking out at the sea of shocked faces and flashing cameras. I plugged my encrypted tablet directly into the audio-visual cord resting on the stand. Behind me, the massive digital projection screen flickered to life. My father just told you that I am trying to destroy a pregnant woman, I announced, my voice booming through the atrium speakers. He wants you to believe that Felicity is a victim. Let us look at the evidence she posted online just 2 hours ago to prove her miraculous condition to the world. I tapped my tablet. The massive screen behind me lit up with the grainy black and white ultrasound image Felicity had proudly shared on all her social media accounts to garner sympathy. A collective murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. It is a beautiful picture, I continued smoothly. But there is a massive flaw in Felicity's narrative. When you steal a medical image to fake a pregnancy, you should remember to scrub the digital metadata and the patient identification numbers printed in the top corner. I tapped the tablet again. A new image appeared right next to Felicity's ultrasound. It was the exact same picture. Every shadow, every curve, and the precise numerical code at the top were entirely identical. The crowd fell dead silent. This second image was taken exactly 3 years ago, I stated, projecting my voice over the stunned silence. It belongs to a woman named Sarah. She lives in a modest single-story house in Atlanta, Georgia. She is a dedicated mother, a hard-working woman, and most importantly, she is Desmond's actual legal wife. The silence shattered into absolute chaos. Reporters yelled over each other, shoving their microphones toward the stage. The socialites shrieked in disbelief. Felicity leaped out of her velvet chair, her face contorted in sheer panic, completely forgetting her fragile pregnant persona as she stared at the damning proof on the screen. Desmond has been funding a secret, legally binding marriage in Atlanta, using money stolen from my father's commercial real estate firm, I declared over the roaring crowd. Felicity is not a pregnant victim. She is a financial shield for a man who is actively running from cartel debt. I turned my head and locked eyes with Desmond. He was standing near the catering exit, his face drenched in sweat. The moment my words registered, pure survival instinct took over. He spun around, shoving a waiter out of his way, sending a tray of champagne glasses crashing to the floor, and sprinted toward the glass doors leading to the botanical gardens. He did not make it past the threshold. The doors swung open violently from the outside. 4 federal agents wearing heavy tactical vests stamped with the letters FBI stepped directly into Desmond's path. They did not hesitate. The lead agent grabbed Desmond by the collar of his expensive suit, slammed him hard against the tempered glass wall, and wrenched his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs echoed clearly over the screaming crowd. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs snapped the entire botanical garden atrium into absolute pandemonium. The carefully curated illusion of the Heritage Foundation Gala disintegrated in a matter of seconds. Socialites shrieked and scattered, abandoning their crystal glasses of sparkling cider as they practically trampled each other to get away from the glass wall. The local news crews immediately swiveled their heavy cameras, the red recording lights blinking furiously as they captured every single frame of the takedown. Desmond struggled against the cold, tempered glass, his face completely devoid of its usual arrogant smirk. He looked small, terrified, and utterly exposed. The lead FBI agent pressed a heavy forearm against Desmond's back, securing the cuffs, while loudly reading him his rights. He was formally charging him with wire fraud, international money laundering, and conspiracy to defraud a federal financial institution. I stood completely still on the stage, watching the destruction of the man who had tried to blackmail me. Felicity reacted with the kind of immediate, self-serving reflex that had defined her entire life. The moment she saw the federal agents, she dropped her hands from her flat stomach. The protective, expectant mother routine vanished instantly. She fell to her knees on the marble floor, burying her face in her hands, and began to wail loudly enough for the microphones to catch it. I had absolutely no idea, Felicity screamed, her voice echoing off the glass ceiling. I am a victim here. He lied to me. He used me. I thought he loved me, but he is a criminal. Please, someone help me. I am completely innocent. Desmond twisted his head to glare at her, genuine disgust flashing across his panicked face. But the federal agents yanked him forward before he could say a word. Donovan realized his empire was imploding on live television. The carefully crafted image of his commercial real estate firm was bleeding out on the marble floor. He abandoned the podium, marching down the steps with his chest puffed out, attempting to project the absolute authority he had wielded over this family for decades. "Officers, I demand you remove this man from my event immediately," Donovan barked, pointing a furious finger at Desmond. I had absolutely no idea about any of this. This man deceived us all. He infiltrated my company and my family under false pretenses. I will personally see to it that he is prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I stepped directly into Donovan's path, cutting off his desperate attempt to salvage his reputation. The cameras instantly pivoted to catch our confrontation. "Just like you had no idea about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands," I asked, my voice carrying clearly across the silent watching crowd. "Do not play the victim, Dad. It is a terrible look for you." Donovan's face turned a violent shade of purple. "Gwendolyn, shut your mouth right now," he hissed, his voice dropping to a lethal, threatening register meant only for me. "You have done enough damage." "I'm just getting started," I countered, taking a deliberate step closer to him. "You think you can throw Desmond to the wolves and walk away clean? I spent my entire childhood watching you forge signatures in your basement office. I know exactly how you hold a pen when you are faking a notary stamp. I recognize your distinct handwriting on Desmond's financial guarantor forms. You knew he was laundering cartel money because you were the one taking a cut." Donovan opened his mouth to scream a denial, but the lead FBI agent approached us, leaving Desmond in the custody of two heavily armed deputies. "Miss Wilson," the agent said, looking directly at me. "We intercepted the transmission from the parking lot standoff. Do you have the evidence you referenced on the recorded line?" "I certainly do," I replied. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out the thick, encrypted physical ledger Marcus had printed from Donovan's own silver flash drive. I handed it directly to the federal agent. The heavy binder landed in his hands with a satisfying thud. "This contains the unredacted, decrypted financial records from Donovan's personal shadow ledger," I stated, speaking loudly so every reporter in the room could hear me. "It completely details a decade of tax evasion, bribed city officials, and fraudulent shell companies. More importantly, it directly links Donovan to Desmond's offshore accounts. You will find my father's authorizing signatures on every single illicit wire transfer moving through Atlanta. He is the architect of the entire laundering operation." Donovan stared at this binder in the agent's hands, his breath hitched in his throat. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a sudden, overwhelming realization that he had handed me the exact instrument of his own destruction when he accidentally dropped his drive into my bag. "You are an absolute monster," Donovan whispered, his voice trembling with genuine fear. "No," I replied, my expression perfectly flat. "I am a corporate crisis manager. You just hired the wrong one. The lead agent did not waste another second. He signaled to the two remaining federal marshals. They moved in swiftly, grabbing Donovan by both arms. The patriarch of the family, the man who had controlled and terrified everyone around him for his entire life, was slammed against the very podium where he had just stood spewing lies. The second set of handcuffs clicked shut, binding his wrists behind his back. Donovan began to shout for his legal team, his voice cracking as the agents dragged him down the center aisle of the botanical gardens. The socialites backed away from him as if he were carrying a plague. The flashes of the news cameras illuminated his utter disgrace, cementing his downfall in the public record forever. With Donovan and Desmond both in federal custody, the crowd's attention was entirely focused on the chaotic scene unfolding at the main exit. But my eyes scanned the perimeter of the room. I was looking for the one person who had been suspiciously quiet during the entire takedown. I spotted her slipping behind a row of decorative palm trees near the catering entrance. Caroline was moving with frantic, desperate speed. She had completely abandoned her crying daughter on the floor. She was holding a mobile phone to her ear with a white-knuckled grip, her face contorted in sheer panic. I moved silently through the crowd, tracking her movements as she pushed through a set of heavy service doors and disappeared down a quiet maintenance hallway. I followed her, stepping into the corridor just in time to hear her desperate voice echoing off the concrete walls. "I do not care what time it is in Geneva." Caroline shrieked into the phone, her aristocratic polish entirely gone. "You have to execute the transfer right now. I have the hidden power of attorney. I am authorizing the immediate liquidation of the domestic accounts. Move all 30 million into the Swiss accounts before the federal government freezes the assets. Do it right this second, or we will lose absolutely everything." She was trying to steal the remaining fortune and flee. The final phase of my family's destruction had just begun, and Caroline was completely unaware that I had anticipated this exact desperate maneuver. The heavy glass doors of First Sterling Fidelity Bank glided open. Caroline marched across the Italian marble floor with the singular, terrifying focus of a woman cornered. She bypassed the teller line entirely, ignoring the polite protests of the lobby concierge, and headed straight for the executive management suites. She clutched a leather portfolio to her chest, her knuckles white, her designer sunglasses pushed up into her perfectly styled hair. She was running on pure adrenaline and sheer panic from the previous night's disaster. She slammed her hand against the frosted glass door of the regional manager's office and pushed it open without knocking. "Transfer the domestic holdings immediately," Caroline ordered, her voice sharp and breathless. "I have the signed power of attorney right here. I need $30 million moved to the Geneva accounts before the end of the business hour." She tossed the heavy portfolio onto the polished mahogany desk. The regional manager, Mr. Davis, did not reach for the documents. He simply folded his hands and looked past her. "You are going to have a very hard time executing that transfer, Caroline," I said. Caroline whipped around, her face already pale from the morning's frantic rush, drained of whatever color remained. I sat comfortably in the leather wingback chair in the corner of the office, crossing my legs, my encrypted tablet resting neatly on my lap. I wore a tailored crimson suit, projecting the absolute control she was so rapidly losing. "What are you doing here?" Caroline hissed, her eyes darting between me and the bank manager. "Mr. Davis, call security. Remove this woman from the premises. She has absolutely no authorization to be in this room while I conduct private family business." Mr. Davis did not touch his phone. He remained perfectly still. "You have no power here, Gwendolyn," Caroline sneered, stepping toward me with venom in her eyes. "I hold the primary power of attorney for Donovan's estate. I am legally entitled to this money. I sacrificed my youth, raising a difficult, ungrateful, barren brat like you. I spent decades curating this family's image, covering up your flaws, and building this empire alongside your father. You will not steal my future just because you are bitter and alone. Execute the wire transfer, Mr. Davis, now." Mr. Davis slowly opened the leather portfolio. He glanced at the heavily notarized documents Caroline had provided, then pushed them gently back across the desk toward her. "I apologize, Mrs. Vance. The manager stated, his tone rigidly professional. This power of attorney is void. The accounts you are attempting to access no longer exist under Donovan Vance's name, nor under any of his associated domestic shell corporations. Caroline froze. Her hands began to tremble. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "The money was there yesterday. I checked the balances myself. $30 million does not just vanish. It does not vanish," I corrected smoothly, standing up from the wingback chair and stepping into her line of sight. "It simply changes ownership." I walked over to the desk and tapped the screen of my tablet, turning it so Caroline could see the glowing digital ledger. "You thought you could outsmart federal auditors by moving funds through the Cayman accounts and bringing them back stateside under a holding company," I explained, matching her panicked energy with absolute ice. "But you forgot one crucial detail about holding companies, Caroline. They operate on leveraged debt. When Donovan used that holding company to secure Desmond's commercial real estate loans, he put the entire $30 million up as collateral." Caroline stared at the screen, her breathing turning shallow and erratic. "When Desmond defaulted on those loans last week because he was too busy paying off a cartel to manage his actual real estate developments, the debt was auctioned off to private equity." I continued, leaning closer to her. "My cybersecurity firm's investment wing acquired that debt 3 weeks ago. We legally purchased the holding company. As of this morning, when the federal government indicted Donovan for money laundering, the holding company automatically seized all domestic collateral to cover the impending losses." I paused, letting the reality of her total destruction sink in. "The $30 million belongs to my firm now, Caroline. Your accounts have been seized. You have exactly $0 to your name. The air in the office went completely dead." Caroline looked at the bank manager, desperate for a denial, but Mr. Davis simply nodded in confirmation. The empire she had viciously guarded, the wealth she had used to belittle me my entire life, was gone. "You stole it!" Caroline shrieked, her aristocratic polish completely shattering. She slammed her fists onto the mahogany desk. "You manipulative, thieving sociopath! We built that money. Donovan and I built this fortune from the ground up. We sacrificed everything for it. We did what had to be done. I did not back away. What exactly had to be done?" Caroline, she was hyperventilating now, completely consumed by blind, unrestrained rage. The cognitive dissonance of losing her entire identity broke whatever filter she had left. "We protected this family," Caroline screamed, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "Do you think Donovan became a titan of industry by playing by the rules? When his original partner tried to audit the accounts and blow the whistle on the offshore funds, who do you think handled it? I did. I was the one who forged Arthur Vance's medical history. I was the one who signed the psychiatric hold to have him institutionalized so we could take full control of the assets. We locked him away to build this money, and I will not let you take it from me." The room went dead silent. The only sound was Caroline's ragged, heavy breathing. I looked past her shoulder to the quiet man sitting on the sofa on the opposite side of the room. He had been so still, so unassuming, that Caroline had not even registered his presence when she stormed into the office. He wore a simple gray suit and held a small black audio recorder in his hand. The man stood up slowly. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a gold badge. "Mrs. Vance," the man said, his voice calm and authoritative. "I am Special Agent Miller with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Caroline slowly turned around. The blood completely drained from her face, leaving her looking hollow and gray. "I am here investigating the financial discrepancies tied to Donovan Vance's real estate firm," Agent Miller continued, stepping forward. "But based on the spontaneous confession you just made regarding the fraudulent institutionalization and false imprisonment of Arthur Vance, you are now under arrest for criminal conspiracy." Caroline opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The absolute finality of her own words had trapped her. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. She realized entirely too late that the bank manager's office had never been a sanctuary. It was a perfectly laid trap, and she had walked right into it. Agent Miller pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "Please turn around and place your hands behind your back, Mrs. Vance." Caroline did not fight. The fight had been completely drained out of her. She numbly turned around, and the sharp click of the handcuffs echoed in the quiet office. I watched her perfectly manicured wrists get bound together, feeling no pity, only the cold, satisfying weight of absolute justice. But as Agent Miller escorted a silent, devastated Caroline toward the door, my tablet screen suddenly flashed red with a high-priority encrypted alert from Marcus. I tapped the notification and a live security feed popped up. It was footage from the safe house where my team was guarding Arthur Vance. The front gates were blown open and 3 black tactical vehicles were swarming the property. I stared at the blinking red alert on my tablet. The cartel had made their final desperate move to silence Arthur Vance before he could testify. Through the encrypted live feed, I watched 3 black tactical vehicles ram the reinforced iron gates of the safe house. They expected an easy extraction. They did not expect the heavily armed Tier 1 private military contractors I had stationed on the perimeter. The firefight lasted exactly 4 minutes. My lead contractor Marcus neutralized the threat with terrifying efficiency, securing Arthur and transferring him to a federal armored transport. The cartel's hit squad was apprehended by local authorities before they could flee the sector, completely severing Desmond's last violent lifeline. The Vance family empire was officially irreversibly reduced to ashes. 3 days later, the dust had settled into a suffocating citywide media frenzy. I stood in the kitchen of my high-rise penthouse watching the morning news broadcast on the sleek marble island. Donovan was denied bail. Caroline was facing decades in federal prison for conspiracy and false imprisonment. Desmond was cooperating with the FBI, singing like a canary to avoid a cartel hit behind bars. Then my private elevator chimed. My security detail had been instructed to let her up. I wanted to see this in person. The polished steel doors slid open. Felicity stepped into my foyer. The meticulously crafted image of the glowing, wealthy socialite was completely gone. She wore a wrinkled beige trench coat over basic sweatpants. Her hair was pulled back into a messy knot, and her face was bare, showcasing the dark, heavy bags under her eyes. She looked frantically around the expansive penthouse, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows and the panoramic view of the city skyline she used to claim as her own kingdom. "Gwendolyn," she rasped, her voice trembling. I did not offer her a seat. I turned back to my espresso machine and pressed the brew button. "My accounts are completely frozen," Felicity blurted out, stepping closer but keeping a wary distance. "The feds seized the penthouse. They seized the cars. The district attorney is charging me with wire fraud conspiracy and filing a false police report for the fake pregnancy stunt at the Botanical Gardens. I have absolutely nothing left." "You have the truth," I replied, picking up a ceramic mug. "That is usually free. I need a defense attorney," she pleaded, tears immediately welling in her eyes. "I need a retainer, just $50,000. That is spare change to you now. You control the holding company. You have all the family money." I poured my coffee, watching the dark liquid fill the mug. "It is not family money, Felicity. It is corporate capital reclaimed from a criminal enterprise. There is a massive difference." "We are sisters," she cried, her voice cracking loudly in the pristine, quiet kitchen. "You have to help me. I am sorry I treated you badly. I am so sorry. But Mom and Dad made me do it. They demanded perfection. I had to play along to stay in their favor, to keep my allowance and maintain my position. They pitted us against each other. I was just a victim of their toxic expectations." I took a slow sip of my coffee. The rich, bitter taste grounded me. I looked at the woman who had spent 30 years making my life a living nightmare, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, just a cold, clinical clarity. "They did not force you to do anything," I stated, my voice echoing with pure, absolute ice. I set the mug down on the marble counter. "Donovan and Caroline may have created a toxic environment, but you thrived in it," I continued. "They did not hold a gun to your head and force you to mock me at my college graduation. They did not mandate that you steal my trust fund to pay off your designer credit card debt. You enjoyed every single second of my pain. You relished being the golden child. You weaponized my medical trauma for a sympathy stunt on live television. Do not stand in my home and play the manipulated victim. You are exactly who you chose to be." Felicity stared at me, the tears instantly drying up. The realization that her manufactured vulnerability was entirely useless hit her hard. Her shoulders slumped. "I am going to federal prison, Gwendolyn," she whispered, pure terror leaking into her tone. "I cannot survive in a place like that. I do not know how to do anything." "I know," I said calmly. "That is why I prepared something for you." I reached into the top drawer of the kitchen island and pulled out a single, neatly printed sheet of paper. I slid it across the marble counter toward her. Felicity stepped forward, hope flashing wildly across her exhausted face. She snatched the paper, clearly expecting a cashier's check or a referral to a high-powered defense firm. She looked down at the document, her face instantly drained of color. It was a standard minimum wage job application for a fast food franchise located 3 blocks away. "Here is your help," I instructed. "They are hiring shift managers. It pays $15 an hour. You will learn how to mop a floor, run a register, and balance a cash drawer. It is a highly respectable way to earn your own money for a public defender." Felicity's hands began to shake violently. The paper crinkled in her grip. The sheer, overwhelming insult of being handed a fast food application broke the final remnants of her composure. She slammed the paper down on the marble counter, her face twisting into an ugly, desperate snarl. "You think you are so untouchable?" she hissed, her voice dropping into a venomous register. "You think handing me an application is going to teach me a lesson?" "It is the only honest opportunity you have ever been offered," I replied without blinking. "I am not mopping floors," Felicity spat, backing away toward the elevator, "and I am not going to prison for their mistakes. If you will not finance my defense, the federal prosecutors will." I tilted my head, studying her frantic energy. "What exactly do you think you have to trade?" Felicity let out a harsh, broken laugh. Her eyes were wide, burning with the same ruthless survival instinct that had defined our parents. "Everything," she declared loudly, hitting the elevator call button. "Mom and Dad think they can keep their mouths shut and beat the charges with a high-priced legal team. But they kept physical ledgers at the summer house. They have safety deposit boxes in Zurich that are not listed in the holding company files. I know all the passwords. I know exactly where the physical blackmail files are hidden." The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Felicity stepped backward into the steel cab, her gaze locked onto mine. "I am going straight to the United States Attorney's Office," she vowed, jabbing her finger in the air. "I am turning state's evidence. I will testify against my own parents in open court. I will burn Donovan and Caroline to the ground in exchange for full immunity." The doors began to slide shut, masking her desperate, terrified face. I stood alone in the quiet kitchen, picking my coffee mug back up. The house of cards had not just collapsed. The remaining pieces were now actively setting each other on fire. I watched the digital display above the elevator descend, taking Felicity and her desperate self-serving threats down to the lobby. The ultimate destruction of the Vance family was happening exactly as I had modeled it in my crisis management algorithms. They were turning on each other, ready to tear their own legacy apart just to save their own skin. My phone vibrated in my hand, breaking the cold silence of the penthouse. It was a secure, high-priority message from Marcus. "Donovan posted bail 20 minutes ago. He bypassed his defense attorneys entirely and drove straight to the Vance Commercial Real Estate headquarters. He has convened an emergency board meeting." I did not even bother changing out of my crimson suit. I grabbed my leather briefcase and headed straight for the private helipad on the roof. Donovan thought he could outmaneuver the federal government and me by utilizing the corporate bylaws he wrote decades ago. He was acting on pure cornered animal instinct, trying to lock his assets down before the indictments fully froze his voting rights. The corporate boardroom on the 50th floor of the Vance Tower smelled of expensive cigar smoke and palpable panic. When I pushed open the heavy oak double doors, Donovan was standing at the head of the long mahogany table. He looked uncharacteristically disheveled. His tie was loosened, and his suit jacket was severely wrinkled from spending the night in a federal holding cell. Despite his appearance, he was actively projecting the loud, booming, aggressive authority he had used to bully his way through the business world his entire life. My daughter is trying to destroy a legacy that took 3 generations to build, Donovan bellowed, slamming his fist onto the polished wood. He glared at the 6 older men seated around the table. These were his loyal cronies, the men who had rubber-stamped his fraudulent decisions and looked the other way for 20 years. My grandfather laid the first brick of this firm. Donovan continued, his voice echoing off the glass walls. I turned it into a multi-billion-dollar empire. Gwendolyn has always been bitter because she lacked the spine for real business. Now she is collaborating with federal agents to orchestrate a hostile takeover. I am calling for an immediate binding vote to expel her as a rogue shareholder and strip her of all equity due to breach of fiduciary duty. We vote her out right now before the federal prosecutors freeze our corporate accounts. You cannot strip voting privileges from the majority owner, Donovan, I stated, stepping fully into the room. It is a direct violation of the corporate charter you wrote yourself. The board members jumped in their plush leather seats, swiveling to look at me. Donovan's face turned a violent mottled shade of red. Security! Donovan shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. Remove this woman from my building immediately. The 2 private security guards standing by the door did not move a single muscle. I did not break eye contact with my father as I walked deliberately toward the head of the table. They work for the property management group, Donovan. I said, my voice perfectly level. My cybersecurity firm acquired the debt on this building at 8 o'clock this morning. I own the building. You are just a tenant and your lease is currently under severe review. Donovan let out a harsh, mocking laugh, desperately trying to rally his terrified board members. You own the building, but I control the company. I hold 40% of the voting shares. You have a minority stake. You lose Gwendolyn. Call the vote, gentlemen. I opened my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents heavily stamped with the seal of a federal judge. I tossed them onto the center of the table. They slid perfectly to a stop right in front of Donovan's hands. I hold the proxy rights for Arthur Vance, I announced, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room. Since your wife illegally signed the psychiatric hold to have Arthur institutionalized against his will, his shares have been locked in a frozen trust. The federal judge unsealed them this morning, instantly restoring his 30% stake. Arthur signed full proxy voting authority over to me exactly 1 hour ago. That is only 30%, Donovan sneered, though the heavy sweat beading on his forehead betrayed his rising panic. I still hold 40. My loyal board members hold the remaining 30. You do not have a majority. You cannot touch me. I turned my gaze to the 6 men sitting at the table. They were resolutely refusing to look at Donovan, staring intently at their expensive Italian leather shoes or shuffling blank papers. Ask your loyal friends what they have been doing for the past 12 months, while you were busy laundering cartel money through Desmond's shell companies, I suggested smoothly. Donovan slowly looked at his cronies. His expression shifted from blind rage to sheer, terrifying confusion. What is she talking about? He demanded. They panicked when the federal auditors started sniffing around your offshore accounts last year, I explained, stepping directly into Donovan's personal space. They wanted an exit strategy that would not trigger an SEC investigation. So my holding company quietly bought them out through blind trusts. I purchased their shares at a massive premium in exchange for their absolute silence. I acquired 31% of the board's equity right under your nose. Donovan stepped back, his breath hitching in his throat. He looked at the men he had enriched for decades, finally realizing they had sold him out to save themselves from federal prison. 31% plus Arthur's 30% gives me exactly 61% of the voting power, I stated, driving the final nail into his coffin. I own the controlling interest of Vance Commercial Real Estate. As the majority shareholder, I am calling a binding resolution. I declared, raising my voice so the security guards and the recording devices caught every word. Donovan Vance is hereby terminated as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately for gross misconduct, systemic fraud, and corporate malfeasance. He is permanently stripped of his board seat and banned from the premises. The reality of losing his company, his power, and his entire identity all at once crashed down on Donovan. His eyes went wide. He suddenly clutched the center of his chest with both hands. He let out a loud, dramatic gasp, his face contorting in exaggerated agony. He dropped to his knees, wheezing loudly, and collapsed onto the plush carpet. My heart. Donovan groaned, thrashing on the floor. Get a doctor. I am having a massive heart attack. The board members shot up from their chairs in an absolute panic, shouting for help. I remained perfectly still. I looked at the doorway and signaled Marcus, who immediately pushed the boardroom doors open. Two paramedics whom I had kept on standby in the lobby specifically for this exact scenario rushed in with their trauma equipment. They dropped beside Donovan, quickly cutting his shirt open and attaching a portable heart monitor to his chest. The room was dead silent as everyone waited for the reading. The lead paramedic looked at the digital display, sighed heavily, and then looked up at me with a distinctly annoyed expression. His heart rate is perfectly normal, the paramedic announced loudly to the entire room. He is completely faking it to avoid the vote. Get up, Donovan, I ordered, staring down at the pathetic man writhing on the carpet. You are embarrassing yourself, and the federal marshals are waiting in the lobby. He stopped, gasping instantly. The color returned to his face, replaced by a sullen, venomous glare. He allowed the paramedics to haul him to his feet just in time for Agent Miller to walk through the double doors and place him under formal arrest. Fast forward 6 weeks. The polished mahogany of the Vance Tower was replaced by the sterile, fluorescent-lit conference room of the United States Attorney's Office. The federal trial was looming, and Donovan and Caroline's high-priced defense team had just detonated their desperate counteroffensive. Federal prosecutor Hayes tossed a thick-bound legal motion onto the center of the metal table. The defense strategy was printed right on the cover page. They are going for a full character assassination, Hayes stated, rubbing his temples. Donovan and Caroline are pleading not guilty. Their core defense is that they are technologically illiterate victims. They are officially claiming that your cybersecurity firm orchestrated a massive multi-year cyber attack against Vance Commercial Real Estate. They are telling the judge that you hacked their private servers, fabricated the shadow ledgers, and planted the Cayman Island wire transfers to forcefully steal the family empire. I picked up the motion, scanning the aggressively worded accusations. They were painting me as a vengeful, greedy rogue hacker who had framed her own innocent parents out of sheer spite. They are requesting that all digital evidence be thrown out. Hayes continued, looking at me with a sharp, assessing gaze. They argue that as a world-class cybersecurity expert, you have the exact skill set required to manipulate this data. Is there any vulnerability in your extraction method? Gwendolyn. Is there any possible way a jury might believe you planted this? I dropped the motion back onto the table with a dismissive thud. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a deep, unexpected wave of relief wash over me. I used my skill set to protect them for my entire adult life, I replied, my voice steady and cold. When I was 22, Donovan drove his Mercedes through a storefront while severely intoxicated. I spent 3 days scrubbing the police blotter from the local press, burying the incident under a mountain of manipulated search engine optimization algorithms. When Caroline accidentally wired $200,000 to a fraudulent charity, I tracked the IP address and strong-armed the scammers into returning every cent before Donovan could find out. I spent my youth covering their tracks and erasing their sins to earn a fraction of their approval. It is intensely liberating to finally be the one holding the spotlight to their crimes, instead of hiding them in the dark. Hayes nodded slowly, respecting the boundary I had just drawn. But a narrative of past loyalty will not hold up against a defense attorney creating reasonable doubt. We need absolute, undeniable proof that Donovan physically authorized those illegal trades. I turned to Marcus, who was standing quietly by the frosted glass door. Show him. Marcus stepped forward and placed a sleek silver hard drive on the table next to the defense motion. He plugged it into the secure projector system. Donovan's lawyers do not understand how modern financial infrastructure actually works, Marcus explained, bringing up a complex, multi-layered digital schematic on the screen. They think a wire transfer is just a piece of paper. It is not. We did not just copy Donovan's shadow ledger. We extracted the blockchain hash tied to every single transaction. I stood up, pointing to the glowing data points on the projection. Every illegal transfer moving cartel money into Donovan's offshore accounts carries a digital fingerprint, I stated. We secured the unbreakable blockchain evidence of the exact IP logs, but we went one step further. I tapped the screen, bringing up a side-by-side comparison of keystroke dynamics. We pulled the biometric typing data from the internal corporate servers. I continued. You can fake a digital signature, and you can spoof an IP address. But you cannot fake the physical cadence of a man typing. Donovan has typed with only his 2 index fingers since 1995. He strikes the enter key with exactly 2.4 pounds of pressure. This biometric rhythm is hard-coded into the authorization metadata of every single illegal trade. My firm did not hack him. His own physical, undeniable habits convicted him. Prosecutor Hayes stared at the screen, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across his face. This is bulletproof. They cannot argue against physical biometric logs. The defense's entire hacking theory is dead on arrival. The heavy conference room door suddenly swung open. Agent Miller stepped inside, his usual stoic demeanor replaced by an expression of urgent intensity. He held a secure federal mobile phone in his hand. "We have a massive development," Agent Miller announced, locking eyes with me. That was Desmond's defense attorney on a secure line from the federal holding facility. Desmond is panicking. He knows the cartel is actively trying to reach him inside the prison, and he knows Donovan is trying to pin the entire laundering operation on him to save his own skin. "What is he offering?" Hayes asked, instantly shifting into negotiation mode. "He wants full protective custody and a guaranteed reduced sentence," Miller replied. "In exchange, he is offering a proffer agreement that blows this entire case wide open." I crossed my arms, waiting. Desmond was a coward. I knew he would eventually crack, but he needed a bargaining chip valuable enough to secure federal protection from Donovan's wrath. "Desmond claims he kept an insurance policy against your father," Agent Miller stated, his voice dropping to a grim, serious register. "He has a secret, unedited audio recording of a private meeting between him and Donovan from the night of the Botanical Garden Gala." "What is on the tape?" I asked, the temperature in the room seemingly dropping 10 degrees. Agent Miller took a deep breath. "It is a recording of Donovan soliciting a cartel fixer. He is explicitly heard planning to have you physically harmed permanently before you could completely seize the company. Desmond is handing over proof that your father put a hit out on your life." The heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse swung open to a blinding sea of camera flashes. The trial of the United States versus Donovan Vance had officially become the media spectacle of the decade. Every seat in the gallery was packed with Atlanta's high society, local journalists, and federal watchdogs eager to witness the collapse of a titan. I walked down the center aisle, feeling the collective weight of 100 stares, and took my seat behind the prosecution's table. Donovan sat rigidly at the defense table, flanking his lead counsel, a shark-like attorney named Sterling. Caroline sat directly behind him, her pristine posture replaced by a nervous, twitching energy. Sterling wasted absolutely no time. When I was called to the stand to verify the digital evidence, he immediately launched his aggressive counteroffensive. He paced the floor, pitching his voice to echo off the wood-paneled walls, attempting to paint me not as a corporate whistleblower, but as a greedy, spiteful child, staging a hostile takeover out of pure malice. Miss Vance, Sterling began adjusting his expensive suit jacket with a theatrical sigh. "Is it not true that you have harbored a deep, simmering vendetta against your parents for years? You felt overshadowed, neglected. Didn't you harbor deep resentment because your father favored your sister at your graduation?" I sat back in the wooden witness chair. I looked directly at Donovan, watching the arrogant smirk attempting to form on his lips, then turned my gaze back to Sterling. "I harbor resentment for his financial crimes," I replied, my voice projecting crisp and clear across the silent courtroom. "His lack of parenting is just a character flaw. His money laundering is a federal offense. I did not rewrite the blockchain to process cartel money. He did." Sterling visibly tightened his jaw, stepping back to regroup. But the damage was already done. The jury was writing furiously on their notepads. My team had already secured the unbreakable blockchain evidence of the IP logs, explicitly proving that Donovan's personal physical devices executed every single illegal trade. I had explained to the jury how we pulled the biometric typing data from the internal corporate servers. The physical cadence of Donovan striking the enter key was hard-coded into the authorization metadata of the offshore accounts. My absolute refusal to play the emotional victim stripped away Sterling's only defense narrative. But the absolute destruction of Donovan's case did not come from me. It came from the prosecution's star witness. When Felicity's name was called by the bailiff, a shockwave rippled through the gallery. Caroline gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. Donovan gripped the edge of the defense table so hard his knuckles turned white. Felicity walked down the aisle wearing a plain gray suit completely devoid of her usual designer accessories and arrogant swagger. She took the oath sat in the witness box and looked at our parents with a hollow, terrified expression. She had taken the plea deal. Prosecutor Hayes stood before her. Miss Vance, can you please tell the court about your involvement in the offshore shadow accounts? Felicity did not hold back. Desperate to avoid a federal prison sentence and terrified of the cartel ties I had exposed, she laid out the entire criminal enterprise with devastating precision. She completely dropped the act of the innocent socialite. To save herself, she detailed exactly how her parents and Desmond orchestrated the fraud. She explained how Caroline had forged the psychiatric hold for Arthur Vance. She provided the exact routing numbers Desmond used to funnel the cartel cash through the Cayman Islands. Most damning of all, she confirmed that Donovan was the architect of the entire operation. She recounted specific family dinners where Donovan had explicitly instructed her on how to hide the physical ledgers at their summer estate to avoid SEC audits. "I just did what they told me to do!" Felicity cried, genuine tears finally streaming down her face as she pointed a trembling finger at our parents. Mom and Dad orchestrated everything. They told Desmond where to hide the money, and they told me to keep my mouth shut to protect the family image. I am so sorry. Caroline buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as the gallery erupted into furious, scandalized whispering. The defense table was a scene of total devastation. Sterling sat down heavily, tossing his pen onto his legal pad, realizing the case was entirely unwinnable. Felicity had just handed the federal government a perfectly wrapped conviction, completely destroying their hacking defense. The judge struck his gavel repeatedly, demanding order in the court. Donovan's face had turned a lethal apoplectic shade of purple. The carefully constructed facade of the brilliant, untouchable patriarch was entirely gone. He was a trapped animal, stripped of his power, his money, and his golden child's loyalty. His chest heaved with ragged breaths as he glared at Felicity, then at me. He stood up abruptly, his heavy wooden chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. He ignored Sterling's frantic attempts to grab his arm and pull him back down. "Your Honor!" Donovan boomed, his voice shaking with absolute unrestrained fury. "I am firing my legal counsel effectively immediately. They are completely incompetent, and this trial is a circus." The judge frowned deeply, leaning forward over the bench. "Mr. Vance, I strongly advise against this. You are in the middle of a federal trial facing decades in prison. I am exercising my constitutional right to represent myself," Donovan declared, slamming his hand onto the defense table. He turned his lethal gaze entirely on me, his eyes burning with a desperate, destructive hatred. "And I am calling my daughter Gwendolyn Vance back to the stand for redirect." He intended to use his newfound legal authority to cross-examine me himself. He wanted to corner me on the stand, bypass all legal decorum, and verbally batter me until I broke, just like he had done throughout my entire childhood. He thought he could still intimidate me into a confession, completely unaware that I was holding Desmond's secret audio tape of his murder plot, just waiting for the perfect moment to play it for the jury. Donovan dismissed his high-priced defense attorney with a sharp, arrogant wave of his hand. He stepped out from behind the heavy oak defense table, his chest puffed out instantly, attempting to channel the untouchable corporate dictator he had played for decades. The federal judge issued a stern, direct warning about courtroom decorum and the severe risks of self-representation. Donovan completely ignored him. He locked his eyes on me, his gaze burning with a cornered, desperate hatred. I stood up from the prosecution table, smoothed the lines of my crimson suit, and walked deliberately back to the witness stand. I sat down, folded my hands neatly in my lap, and waited. I felt absolutely no fear. I felt no intimidation. I felt nothing but clinical cold anticipation. He was handing me the shovel, and I was going to let him dig his own grave. Donovan began pacing the length of the jury box. He did not ask legal questions. He did not attempt to dismantle the blockchain evidence my firm had provided. Instead, he launched a vicious, targeted psychological assault. He utilized the exact same tactics of terror and humiliation he had used to control our family for 30 years. He pointed a trembling finger at my face, demanding I admit to hacking his secure servers. He yelled that my entire cybersecurity firm was a sham, built on stolen family capital and pure spite. I answered every single accusation with a flat, unwavering denial. My tone remained perfectly level. My absolute refusal to react emotionally only enraged him further. His face turned a deep, dangerous shade of crimson. He abandoned all pretense of a legal defense strategy and resorted to pure, unfiltered character assassination. "You were always a liar, Gwendolyn." Donovan bellowed, his voice vibrating off the high ceilings of the federal courthouse. He stepped out of the center aisle and marched directly toward the witness stand, invading my physical space. "You are a bitter, greedy child," he screamed, spit flying from his lips. "You have spent your entire life jealous of your sister and resentful of my success. Just like when you lied about needing money for rent when you were sleeping in a shelter. You begged me for a handout, claiming you were starving while secretly plotting to steal my company. You are a total fraud. You manufactured this entire digital trail because you have never been smart enough to beat me in the real world. You are pathetic. Admit you planted the evidence. Admit you are framing me." The courtroom held its collective breath. In the gallery, Caroline was weeping loudly into a silk handkerchief. The jury stared intently at me, waiting to see if I would finally crack under the sheer weight of a father's public venomous hatred. I did not blink. I did not shift in my chair. I simply watched him breathe heavily, waiting for the echo of his tirade to die completely in the cavernous room. "I am not the one who needs to confess, Donovan," I stated, my voice cutting through the heavy, suffocating silence like a diamond blade. I turned my head away from him, completely dismissing his presence, and looked directly up at the federal judge. "Your Honor," I said calmly, "the prosecution requests permission to submit Rebuttal Exhibit 402 into evidence at this time. It directly and irrevocably addresses the defendant's claims regarding my fabricated involvement in his financial crimes." Prosecutor Hayes was already on his feet, walking briskly toward the court clerk with a secure silver flash drive in his hand. Donovan stopped pacing. A flicker of genuine confusion crossed his sweating face. He looked back at his former defense attorney for guidance, but Sterling simply crossed his arms and looked away completely in the dark and entirely unwilling to help a client who had just fired him. The judge reviewed the digital motion on his monitor and nodded firmly. "Proceed." The clerk plugged the flash drive into the court's secure audio system. The heavy speakers mounted on the courtroom walls crackled to life. Desmond's frantic, panicked voice immediately filled the room. He was asking for reassurance about the Cayman Island transfers. Then, the undeniable booming baritone of Donovan Vance echoed through the speakers. The recording was crystal clear. It had been captured the night of the Botanical Garden Gala, recorded secretly by Desmond as a desperate insurance policy. The jury listened in absolute silence as Donovan explicitly instructed Desmond to contact his cartel fixers. He detailed the exact routing numbers for the offshore accounts confirming the financial fraud and the massive money laundering operation in his own unmistakable words. He mapped out exactly how they were going to hide the money from the SEC auditors. Then the audio tone shifted. Donovan's recorded voice dropped into a chilling, casual register. He stopped talking about corporate fraud and started talking about eliminating threats. "Deal with my daughter," Donovan's voice commanded over the speakers, echoing off the wooden panels of the courthouse. "Gwendolyn is getting too close to the Cayman ledgers. I want her gone. Hire the professional. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong. I do not care what it costs to pay the cartel off. Just make sure she never wakes up." The audio file clicked off, leaving a terrifying, suffocating silence in its wake. Donovan stood completely paralyzed in the center of the courtroom. The aggressive, untouchable patriarch was instantly vaporized. He was reduced to a pale, trembling old man who had just listened to his own voice order the murder of his own child in open court. His mouth hung open, but he was entirely speechless. A woman in the jury box let out a sharp, horrified gasp. In a fraction of a second, the entire gallery erupted into sheer chaos. Reporters scrambled aggressively over the wooden benches, shouting into their phones. Caroline let out a high-pitched, hysterical scream, collapsing against the woman sitting next to her. Felicity stared at her father with a look of pure, unadulterated revulsion. Donovan slowly turned his head to look at me. His eyes were wide with absolute primal terror. The realization that he had just sealed his own fate with zero chance of escape finally broke his mind. The federal judge grabbed his wooden gavel and slammed it down violently against the sounding block, the sharp, authoritative cracks echoing over the roaring uproar, signaling the definitive, irreversible end of Donovan Vance. The echoes of the judge's gavel from Donovan's catastrophic cross-examination attempt seemed to linger in the courtroom for days. The trial moved with brutal, unstoppable efficiency after the audio tape was played. The defense had completely collapsed. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When the foreman stood to read the verdict, the tension in the room was suffocating. I sat behind the prosecution table, my posture straight, my hands folded calmly on the polished wood. On the charge of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, we find the defendant Donovan Vance guilty. Donovan stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tightly, a muscle twitched rapidly near his ear. On the charge of international money laundering, guilty. On the charge of solicitation of murder, guilty. The foreman continued down the list. Caroline was found guilty of severe corporate fraud accessory to money laundering and the illegal institutionalization of Arthur Vance. Desmond was convicted of racketeering and financial conspiracy. The sweeping total destruction of the Vance family was read aloud into the permanent public record. Judge Alvarez leaned forward over the heavy wooden bench, her gaze sweeping over my parents. She did not just hand down decades-long prison sentences. She delivered absolute financial annihilation. This court finds that the defendants built an empire entirely on deceit, theft, and the ruthless exploitation of their partners and investors. Judge Alvarez stated, her voice ringing with finality. Therefore, I am ordering full and immediate restitution. Every domestic and offshore account tied to the Vance name is hereby frozen and seized. The holding company, the commercial real estate portfolio, the primary estate in Beacon Hill, and all luxury assets will be liquidated. Arthur Vance and the defrauded investors will be made entirely whole. You are stripped of all personal and corporate capital. Donovan's knees buckled slightly. He reached out to grip the defense table. The realization that he could not buy his way out of a federal appeal hit him with the force of a freight train. He was officially, irrefutably bankrupt. He had absolutely nothing left. The United States Marshals moved in immediately. The heavy, sharp, metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the silent courtroom as they secured Donovan's wrists behind his back. He did not fight. The fight had been completely drained out of him. Then the marshals moved to Caroline. As the cold steel clamped around her delicate wrists, she twisted her body around. Her perfectly maintained composure was shattered. Her hair was a mess. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. She locked eyes with me across the room. She stared at me, her expression shifting into a desperate, silent plea for mercy. She expected me to intervene. She expected the daughter she had birthed to suddenly feel a rush of familial loyalty, to stand up and beg the judge for leniency. I sat perfectly still. Looking at her terrified, tear-stained face, my mind snapped back to a sterile hospital room 15 years ago. I was 19, battling a severe, life-threatening infection that had kept me hospitalized for weeks. Caroline had walked into my room wearing a pristine tennis outfit. She did not ask how I was feeling. She dropped a stack of medical bills onto the foot of my bed and complained loudly that my illness was cutting into her country club budget and embarrassing her in front of her social circle. She told me to figure it out, turned on her heel, and left me to drown in medical debt. She had treated me as entirely disposable. I met Caroline's pleading eyes in the courtroom and offered her absolutely nothing. No pity, no anger, just a cold, clinical blankness. I gave a microscopic shake of my head. Caroline let out a broken, wretched sob as the marshals forcefully guided her toward the holding cells. Desmond followed right behind them, his face pale with the knowledge that the federal prison system was crawling with cartel members who knew exactly who he had testified against. The courtroom slowly emptied, the media rushing out to broadcast the spectacular fall of the Vance empire to the world. I remained at the prosecution table for a long moment, packing my digital files into my leather briefcase. The air felt remarkably clean. While Donovan, Caroline, and Desmond were transported to federal processing, Felicity was allowed to walk out the front doors of the courthouse. Her desperate decision to turn state's evidence and testify against her parents had secured her full immunity from prison time. She was a free woman, but immunity did not protect her bank accounts. The federal asset forfeiture was comprehensive. It seized her trust funds, her allowance, her vehicles, and the luxury condominium she had been living in. She was cast out onto the streets of Atlanta with the clothes on her back and zero access to the family wealth she had weaponized her entire life. 2 days later, I was sitting in my penthouse, reviewing the final restructuring plans for Arthur Vance's newly reclaimed real estate firm. The transition was smooth, the corrupt board members were completely removed, and the legitimate operations were back on track. My tablet chimed with a secure alert from the surveillance grid I had set up around my neighborhood. I tapped the screen, opening a high-definition live feed from the security cameras of a fast food franchise located exactly 3 blocks from my building. I zoomed in on the corner booth. Felicity was sitting there. The immaculate, glowing socialite was entirely gone. She wore a cheap, faded gray sweatshirt and scuffed sneakers. Her hair was pulled into a messy, unwashed ponytail. She looked exhausted, broken, and completely defeated by the reality of her new existence. On the sticky plastic table in front of her was the exact minimum wage employment application I had slid across my marble kitchen island weeks ago. She held a cheap plastic pen in her trembling hand. She stared at the paper for a long time, the weight of her absolute destitution pressing down on her shoulders. Then slowly she uncapped the pen. I watched through the digital feed as she leaned forward and meticulously began to fill out her work history, trading in her stolen designer legacy for the promise of a paper visor, a mop, and $15 an hour. 6 months after the trial, the dust had finally settled over the ruins of the old Vance empire. I stood in the center of the primary executive suite on the top floor of the corporate headquarters. The oppressive dark mahogany furniture and heavy velvet curtains that Donovan had used to intimidate his subordinates were entirely gone. I had ordered the entire floor gutted the day I officially took control. Now the room was surrounded by floor-to-ceiling glass flooded with bright, unfiltered natural light. The restructuring of the logistics and real estate firm had been a monumental task. When the federal government seized Donovan and Caroline's assets, the legitimate shell of the company was left teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. I stepped in, backed by a coalition of clean investors and my own cybersecurity firm's capital. I purged every corrupt board member, fired the executives who had turned a blind eye to the money laundering, and rebuilt the corporate structure from the ground up. Today, the quarterly reports confirmed what I already knew. We were not just surviving. The firm was operating completely ethically, and profits were soaring higher than they ever had under my father's fraudulent reign. I walked over to my desk and picked up a simple cardboard shipping tube. I sliced the tape with a silver letter opener and carefully slid out the contents. It was my executive MBA diploma. I held the thick parchment in my hands, feeling the raised ink of my name. I remembered the exact moment I had started that degree. I was 24, living in a cramped, drafty studio apartment, working 60-hour weeks at my first tech job just to keep the lights on. Every night, I would stay awake until 3 in the morning studying corporate finance and advanced analytics. During those exact same years, Donovan was funneling millions of dollars of stolen investor capital into Felicity's offshore trust fund so she could buy designer cars and vacation in Monaco. He had refused to give me a single dime for tuition, claiming investing in my education was a waste of family resources. I had paid for every single credit hour myself, fueled by pure determination and a silent vow that I would one day outsmart him at his own game. I walked over to the focal wall of the office. For 20 years, a massive, arrogant oil portrait of Donovan Vance had hung in that exact spot, glaring down at anyone who dared to enter his domain. The federal marshals had seized the painting during the liquidation of his luxury assets. The wall had remained blank until today. I picked up a hammer, drove a single steel nail into the drywall, and hung the framed diploma directly in the center. I stepped back, admiring the perfect symmetry. I did not need a painted portrait to demand respect. My credentials spoke for themselves. The sharp, steady ring of my private office line broke the quiet atmosphere. I walked back to my desk and picked up the receiver. An automated robotic voice played over the speaker. "You have a collect call from an inmate at the Federal Correctional Institution. Press 1 to accept." I pressed the button and leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair. Gwendolyn Donovan's voice crackled through the phone. He sounded incredibly old. The booming, terrifying baritone that had dictated my entire childhood was completely gone, replaced by a ragged, desperate rasp. I said nothing. I simply waited for him to play his hand. "You have to help me," he pleaded, his voice shaking with a pathetic manufactured vulnerability. "This place is a nightmare. The conditions are inhumane. My public defender is useless, and my commissary account is entirely empty. You took everything from me. You have millions of dollars now. You have the company. You have to hire me a real appeals lawyer." I looked at the bright sunlight streaming through the windows, feeling absolutely nothing for the man on the other end of the line. No anger, no fear, no lingering childhood desire for his approval. "You orchestrated your own downfall, Donovan," I stated, my voice completely flat and devoid of emotion. "You stole from your partners, you laundered cartel money, and you ordered a hit on my life. Your current living conditions are simply the strict consequences of your own actions." "Gwendolyn, please!" he begged, his tone shifting into a frantic, manipulative whine. "I know we had our differences. I know I was hard on you. But I did it to make you strong. Blood is blood. I am still your father." I looked up at my diploma hanging proudly on the wall. I remembered the decades of being treated as disposable, the psychological warfare, and the blatant favoritism. He had never been a father. He had only ever been a ruthless adversary. "You lost the right to that title a very long time ago," I replied softly, my voice carrying the absolute, unshakable authority he had always desperately craved. "And I am the CEO. Do not call this number again." I placed the receiver down on the base, cutting the connection with a sharp, definitive click. The silence in the office was profound and beautiful. I grabbed my suit jacket, smoothed the lapels, and walked out of the executive suite. The hallways were buzzing with energy. Employees smiled and greeted me as I passed, their faces reflecting genuine respect, rather than the terrified compliance of the previous regime. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the main conference room. The space was bathed in golden afternoon sunlight. Gathered around the large marble table was my inner circle. My brilliant lead analyst, my trusted operations manager, the lead investigators who had helped me expose the Cayman Island accounts, and the new ethical board members. These were the people who had stood by my side when the entire Vance family tried to destroy me. This was my true chosen family. As I entered, the room erupted into applause. My lead analyst popped the cork on a bottle of vintage champagne, pouring the sparkling liquid into crystal flutes. He walked over and handed me a glass, raising his own high in the air. To Gwendolyn, he announced, his voice filled with genuine pride. To her unyielding resilience, her tactical brilliance, and the new era of this company. "You took their worst hits, and you built an empire out of the rubble." The team cheered, raising their glasses in unison. I looked around the room at the smiling faces of the people who valued me for my mind, my integrity, and my strength. I raised my crystal flute to meet theirs, the bubbly champagne catching the sunlight. The heavy, suffocating shadow of the Vance family was permanently eradicated from my life. I had won. I took a sip of the sweet champagne, letting a triumphant, unbothered smile spread across my face, welcoming a future entirely under my control.